Good morning. The December 18th, 2024 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. The board continues to meet in a hybrid format. For those here in person, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Thank you, Mr. Comptroller, and other electronic devices. For those attending virtually, if you desire an opportunity to speak, we ask that you please keep yourself on mute until the chair recognizes you. When you are called upon, please announce your name and organization and speak loudly and clearly. Just a brief moment of personal privilege. It is really exciting and energizing to be here as the chair of the Board of Estimates. And I will briefly say that while it is often asserted that Baltimore has a strong mayor form of government, and I have enormous respect and love for my friend to my immediate left, it is my intent over these next 4 years to assert that the City Council is a co-equal branch of government, and that the council is the closest branch to the people. As chairman of this board, I intend to be a champion for working people and strong fiscal stewardship. During these next 4 years, our city will realize its renaissance amidst an uncertain national climate. We will be tested, but I am extremely confident in our mayor, our comptroller, and the other members of the board that collectively we have what it takes to turn the tide for Baltimore. My goal is growth. Our population and our economy need to grow, and our workers need to prosper. We must be disciplined in our decision-making while still investing in Baltimore's greatest asset, which is its people. With that, at this time, I would ask our clerk, Celeste Amato, for any corrections, additions, and noted abstentions for today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone. Bear with me for just a second. Here we had a few late changes, and we're trying to make sure we get this right, and I don't know what that noise was.
That was somebody who did not hear the announcement about silencing their cell phone, even after it was made twice.
Is that a signal to me?
Ms. Amato?
Thank you, Mr. President. We have the following walk-on item to note this morning for SB 2414843. This is a memorandum of understanding between numerous government agencies, including MONSE, BCRP, MOED, and DPW. This is a first amendment to an existing MOU. I do need to note for the board that this item was a walk-on and has not been fully endorsed by our Department of Pre-Audits. They have recommended amending the language in the MOU to provide greater clarity for the final version of this document. The item and the action requested is to approve a memorandum of understanding amendment in the amount of $986,400. And the background explanation is as follows. This MOU, originally approved by the Board of Estimates on June 21, 2023, was entered into by the parties to develop a successful reentry program plan for individuals returning to the city from a period of incarceration, and further seeks to provide work experience and training opportunities to eligible incarcerated individuals in providing maintenance services for urban public parkland and wilderness trails under the responsibility of the city through Baltimore City Recreation and Parks. We have one deferral to note this morning. The item is SB 2413761. This is a DHCD loan modification for Reservoir Hill Limited 8. This item has been deferred until January 8th at the request of the comptroller. This deferral also, noting for the president, requires a vote. We have one withdrawal to note this morning. That's SB 2414643 for City Council. This is a grant agreement for Associated Black Charities. It was noted as a $150,000 grant. This item is being withdrawn at the request of the council president because it was a duplicate item. We have a protest to note this morning for SB 2413988 for the Department of Transportation, an award for TR 23004R Inspire Schools Sidewalk Reconstruction for $929,925. A protest was received from Jamie Villa on behalf of J Villa Construction, Inc. And we have the following items on the non-routine agenda this morning. They are as follows. SB 2414768 from the Department of Audits, a biennial performance audit of the Department of Human Resources for the fiscal years ended June 30, 2023, and June 30, 2022. SB 24-14770, Department of Audits, biennial performance audit of the Department of Transportation for the fiscal years ended June 30, 2023, and June 30, 2022. SB 24-14848, for the Bureau of Budget Management and Research, supplemental appropriation to the fiscal 2025 adopted budget. SB 24-14618 for the Parking Authority. This is an emergency procurement, Lexington Street Garage elevator repairs for $42,821.75. SB 24-14795, Bureau of Procurement, unauthorized procurement for Populous Technologies, Inc. for $21,000. SB 24-13732, Bureau of Procurement, unauthorized procurement for Benovate, Inc., doing business as Neighborly Software for $285,600. SB 24-14945 for the Department of Public Works. This is a request to approve a hearing for an increase to Baltimore City water, sewer, and stormwater utility rates fiscal year 2025 through fiscal year 2027. I do want to emphasize that this is a notice for a hearing, so we won't be hearing any testimony today. Today is just announcing that there will be a hearing 30 days from now, specifically on January 22, and all statements of opposition or support will be read at that time. SB 24-13988 for the Department of Transportation. This is an award, TR 23004R, Inspire School Sidewalk Reconstruction. Again, a protest was received from Jamie Villa on behalf of J. Villa Construction. SB 24-14649, Bureau of Procurement, State's Attorney's Office. This is an unauthorized procurement, installation of dual drop data for $5,685.84. SB 24-14615, Bureau of Procurement for Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. This is an unauthorized procurement for the Peace Team for $57,250.00. SB 24-14448, Bureau of Procurement for Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. And this is an unauthorized procurement, We Are Us Unity Engagement Men's Movement Incorporated for $84,920. SB 14558, Bureau of Procurement for Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. This is an unauthorized procurement for youth summer engagement for $39,983.27. And I can see my boss handing me a note. Oh,
Because it's not on any of our written.
oh yes, I'm so sorry. I can read that again when we go to vote. Is that okay?
Yeah,
I'll read the
that's
SB number. Sorry, folks, just a little housekeeping. And we have the following abstentions to note for today's agenda. The Honorable Mayor Brandon M. Scott is abstaining on SB 24-13913, Health Department Provider Agreement, the Johns Hopkins University, and SB 24-14347, Department of Transportation Developers Agreement, number 1910, the Johns Hopkins University. The Honorable President Zeke Cohen has no abstentions to note this morning. The Honorable Comptroller Bill Henry is abstaining on all travel requests and travel reimbursements, and is also abstaining on SB 24-14848, BBMR supplemental appropriation to the fiscal 2025 adopted budget. City Solicitor Ebony Thompson has no abstentions to note this morning.
The President would like to abstain on the supplemental also.
Oh, apologies. The Honorable President Zeke Cohen will be abstaining on SB 24-14848, BBMR supplemental appropriation to the fiscal 2025 adopted budget. I'll repeat, City Solicitor Ebony Thompson has no abstentions to note this morning, and the Director of Public Works, Khalil Zaid, has no abstentions to note this morning. We have no votes on the routine agenda to note this morning. And Mr. President, when you're ready to vote on the deferral, I'll provide the details ahead of taking the record of the vote.
Thank you, Ms. Amato.
Thank you.
At this time, I ask for a motion to approve and adopt the opening statement as read by the clerk.
Second. Second.
We're going to do that next. Yeah.
Has it been moved?
Second.
You're moving it.
Second.
Somebody else.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The opening statement has been adopted.
Now we're going to vote on the deferral.
We will now vote on the deferral, which I'd ask Ms. Amato to read out.
Mr. President and Board, that deferral is for SB 24-13761, Department of Housing and Community Development Loan Modification for Reservoir Hill Limited 8.
At this time, I'd ask for a motion on adopting that
So moved.
statement.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. The statement has been adopted. And now direct the board members' attention to the memorandum from my office dated December 16th, 2024, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items together with any corrections, additions, abstentions, and no votes that have been noted by the clerk. I will entertain a motion to approve all the items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving the items on the routine agenda, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda items have been adopted. The first audits, the first item can be found on page 4, SB 24-14770, Department of Audits. This request is to note the biennial performance audit of the Department of Transportation for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. On behalf of the Audit Department, we have City Auditor Josh Pass. Mr. Auditor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. President. Congratulations, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, honorable members. My name is Josh Pash. I am the City Auditor, and I am here to present the biennial performance audit of the Department of Human Resources, and we were looking at the effectiveness of the hiring process. Next slide. Today I will go over the audit objective and scope, the audit methodology we used, the background information, present our finding, and the implementation of the status of the prior findings, and then take any questions. Next slide. Our audit scope and objective. Our objective was to evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of the city hiring process, and then to follow up on the prior findings. Our scope was fiscal years 23 and 22, and we specifically focused on permanent civil service positions. Those are the ones that have Department of Human Resources involvement. And we went from the job requisition to the final offer letter. We did not evaluate how long it takes to have the candidate accept the offer and get them processed. We included 5 agencies: Department of Transportation, Department of General Services, the Department of the Police Department. We only looked at the civil positions only for them, not the sworn officers. Department of Baltimore City Requisitions and Park, and Department of Finance in our scope. Those were chosen because those were the significant agencies that have their own human resource division components. I mentioned that we looked at the scope of fiscal years 23 and 22 because the implementation of Workday was in late calendar year 22. We also looked at new hires in fiscal year 24. Our audit methodology. We conducted interviews and walkthroughs to understand the processes and evaluate the risk and controls. We obtained and reviewed reports from Workday, providing populations of new hires and identified key dates in the hiring process. These will be noted and referenced in finding 1. We requested from the 5 selected agencies records that they had for selected samples of new hires and the key dates in the hiring process for their tracking purposes. We attempted to validate dates provided through Workday documentation, identify causes of delays in the city hiring process. To give some background information, DHR's key hiring tasks and their established timeframes. So in the beginning, an agency submits an open position requisition form. That is the form that the agency submits to notify DHR that they want to open a position. And they also create a job requisition within Workday. That is, they have a budgeted timeline, and this is budget, of 4 days to get the OPR approved, and then a budget of 12 days, again, these are DHR processes, to get the job posted. And then the job postings are typically open for 14 days. An agency can request that the job posting be open for more, and that is time frame for that. The job posting is then closed, and then DHR has established a time frame of 14 days for them to screen applicants and to send referrals to agencies. So DHR in this process looks at all the applicants, and they're looking for minimum requirements for that position, and those that meet the minimum requirements are referred to the agency for their review. Next slide. So it goes over to the agencies. The agencies are responsible before the interview process to develop the interview panel, to develop appropriate interview questions, to review resumes that were referred to by DHR and select those candidates for interviews, and to schedule interviews. So DHR requires a minimum of 5 candidates to be interviewed. So if there are 100 candidates that apply and DHR finds that 20 meet the minimum standards and requirements, then the agency still has the option to select some of those candidates for interview and then go back and interview more. The agency is responsible for conducting the interviews and then going and scoring those interviews, and then once those are compiled, selecting the candidates. And then once the candidates have been selected, whether they're going to hire or not hire, then the agency sends an initial offer letter, and that is contingent upon their background check, and that is basically to see if the candidate's going to accept the position. Once the candidate accepts the position, they will do those contingent checks and background checks and any other checks that they need. Some need drug tests or other tests depending on the position, and then a final offer letter will be sent out. Next page. Okay, turnaround times by using DHR and DGS data. The reason why we selected DGS timeframes is because of the 5 agencies. That was the only one that actually had established timeframes for their budgeted process of how long, set expectations for how long their components would take. So job requisition. The agency, as I mentioned, completes an OPR form and submits a job requisition to DHR and Workday. They have budgeted 9 days from when they select the position that they want to hire to get that process completed. It then goes over to DHR. And DHR, as mentioned in the previous slides, that they have set a budgeted of 4 days to review and approve the job requisition, including those OPR forms. And then the job position is posted for 12 days. And again, that is variable depending on the agency request and the position. And then the 12 days is the budget time that DHR has to review all those forms and get it posted. And then once it's posted, applicants are given the 14 days or however long the agency decides. And then once the job posting is closed, the DHR does the candidate screening. As I mentioned, that's a budget of 14 days. DGS had set themselves a budget of 19 days to conduct the interviews. And then for doing the offer, that includes the preliminary offer, the background checks, selecting the candidates, any negotiations that have to go in there, references, background checks. DGS has set a goal of 39 to 69 days. And then once that's submitted to DHR has set themselves a 1-day turnaround to get everything set up in Workday. Okay, some background information, hiring statistics. So number of open funded positions. Those are the number of positions that are open at year end, fiscal year 22, 23, and 24. As we can see, there was about 2,500 for 22, 2,900 for 23, and 3,000 for 24. The number of open positions filled, those are the positions that were actually hiring during that fiscal year. So as we see, about 1,100 for 22, 1,400 for 23, and 1,500 for 24. And then for context, the total number of pins is 13,700, 14,000, and 14,500 approximately. And those number of pins, they can include positions that are not intended to fill. And so that's a candidate, that's all the positions that are in the city. This information was obtained from DHR as of November of 2024, and the chart includes civilian and non-civilian positions. Again, we focused on the civilian positions. This is for context. Next slide, please. Okay, finding 1. So our first finding is Workday capabilities are not fully utilized to track and monitor the efficiency and effectiveness of the city hiring process. What we found was the city does not have the ability to track and monitor the effectiveness and efficiency of the hiring process and to identify bottlenecks that are hindering hiring tasks to be completed in an efficient manner. DHR has policies and procedures which provide timelines for the key tasks for which they are responsible. However, they have no official policies to monitor those timelines. We noted of the 5 agencies, except for DGS, none of them have formal policies, and they do not have established turnaround times, budgeted timelines to monitor the tasks that they perform in the hiring process. DGS has established its own process for monitoring key dates and identify delays in the hiring process. They've actually set up KPIs to monitor that process, and they're tracking via an Excel spreadsheet. So due to the fact that key dates are not being tracked internally within Workday, or internally within the agency or in Workday, we were unable to evaluate the efficiency of the process and identify the bottlenecks. So when we looked at the causes, Workday has built into it different buckets to track the stages and the progress of the hiring process. Not all personnel from these agencies are aware of those available fields, how to record them and track the dates for the key hiring tasks in Workday, and therefore they're not consistently moving candidates through those stages in order to be able to track those dates. And then we noted that agency recruiters are not fully familiar with how to use reports and dashboards in Workday. So once the data is being captured, which is not done consistently, to be able to use Workday reports to assist in identifying where bottlenecks are occurring. Our recommendations. So our recommendations, we're going to break this out into DHR recommendations and agency recommendations. So recommendations for DHR, to identify DHR and agencies' needs and wants to track and monitor the recruitment process, what data points they need, what reports they need, to define standards in Workday fields that include what each stage and data point means for consistent application by the agency's HR. As we noted, there was a number of buckets and stages in Workday, and in order for our monitoring and efficiency and effectiveness testing, each agency needs to be using those on a consistent basis. Provide periodic training to agencies to include how where to track data points in Workday, and to modify existing reports and develop new reports that will be useful for agencies to monitoring their hiring process and to identify those bottlenecks. Recommendations for the agencies. The police commissioner, directors of Rec and Parks, Department of Finance, and DOT, to establish and implement policies and procedures, to set the timelines for key hiring tasks, establish KPIs that align with the agency's operational goals, which might not be the same for each agency, to monitor the efficiency of that hiring process, and to identify those bottlenecks so that they can be addressed. Next slide, please. Okay, implementation of the status of prior findings and management action plans. So the prior year objective was to evaluate whether agencies were following federal and city guidelines in processing FMLA and ADA requests and properly securing any personal data containing these files. The recommendations related to file retention and securing private personal information, and they were implemented. So to give some background and context for the last audit, was our finding was documentation of compliance of FMLA and ADA were not consistently maintained. We noted that 3 of 4 key agencies were not able to provide FMLA and ADA documentation for some of the samples selected. Those agencies were Police Department, Transportation, and Public Works. Our recommendation was that management in those agencies follow the federal regulations and maintain complete, reliable, supporting documentation to evidence the approval and return to work process. The second finding was that the FMLA files were not restricted. They were restricted inside the DPW Human Resource Office, but once you got in there, they were available to anyone who worked in the office. We recommended that they secure those file cabinets with those files. Next slide. When we did our follow-up, all of those management action plans and recommendations were implemented. And next slide. I want to thank our audit team and the agency personnel who helped us complete this audit, and I will take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pash. Look, we absolutely need to attract top-flight talent to the city, and that means we need reasonable timelines for when people apply to a job that they know whether they have it or not. And I have personally experienced frustrations in bringing on folks. I know the city council was not one of the agencies that you all audited, but I will say we have heard from a plethora of agencies, including our own, that hiring is a real challenge, and we have to compete with both the private sector, other municipalities, and so for Baltimore to win, it is critically important that we are aggressively hiring talent. I appreciate the findings in your report. If there is one that you could kind of key in on that would expedite the process, and I know you looked at both the Department of Human DHR as well as the individual agencies, where do you feel like the greatest gap exists for us to be able to aggressively improve our hiring practices?
So I'll answer that in two parts. So number one, there's the low-hanging fruit. Is we have the tools that are provided in the new ERS system, and those tools are not being utilized. So I think we were not even able to do our testing because those tools not being utilized. So once those tools, those dates are being tracked, then we will able to monitor that efficiency, effectiveness, and see where we are taking longer than we need to be, and to identify those reasons, whether on the city side, whether in the market rate side, or whether then the applicant pool side. But I think the key thing would be able to start tracking that data and obtaining the data.
And that's a breakdown with Workday, or that's when you say these tools, can you further enumerate on that?
Right. So there's a lot of tools in Workday, and I know the city as a whole, and both the human resources side and the financial side, the city is still going through tweaks and improvements and modifications to get Workday basically, I guess, up to speed. There's been implementations across the board, but as agencies are meeting, there's those tweaks. And I think that for the recruiting process, that there are, I guess, clarity modifications, what tools we want to use. And then to basically, the first recommendation was to meet with those agencies and identify like what those needs are, and then to be using those tools. So right now, I can't say if the tools in Workday will solve the problem, if they will collect enough data points, because we're not using them consistently, so we're not able to make that evaluation at the point. So I think the first step would be using those, and then also to identify and meeting with those agencies and the stakeholders on the internal side to identify, like, are those going to be enough? But with the point right now, it's we kind of know the tools we have and we're not using, but we're not able to do anything with them or actually see if they're effective. So I think the key point and the primary thing would to be use those tools and to make sure we're using them consistently across the different agencies.
I appreciate that. I know that we've heard a lot of challenges in terms of the city's implementation of Workday, both on the hiring side and then on just making sure folks get paid. And so I think it's critically important that all of our agencies are consistently using the system that we have, that we've paid for. And again, I will just state before opening to questions from my colleagues that it is absolutely critical that we be able to bring people on to employment in this city at a reasonable time frame. And I'm looking forward to us improving and hitting some benchmarks to help us get there.
If I may add, with the whole Workday implementation process, one of the key components that I believe is critical is the tone at the top. And I think that is would be a key factor in moving the Workday to get the full implementation and complete use. And I hope that the audit helps, give some direction of where there are some open gaps that can be used.
I sincerely appreciate that. Any questions from my colleagues? I see Comptroller Henry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm trying to figure out if there's a succinct way that I can, pull this together. And I think everybody up here has expressed real support for data-driven management in the pursuit of making city government work better. And as the President pointed out, every agency anecdotally complains about slow hiring processes. But my takeaway from this audit is that you went into it trying to find out why the perception is that there's a slow hiring process, and we simply don't have the data points necessary to figure out what is actually slowing down the process. Is that an accurate summation?
Yes, both on the DHR side and the agency side, and the Workday side.
Okay, so that's the only question I have for audits. My other questions for HR and the agencies.
Understood.
Yeah.
All nods for agencies.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again, Mr. Pash. Appreciate your work. Seeing no further questions, I would love to invite Department of Human Resources, Mr. Quentin Herbert, to respond to the audit.
Good morning, Mr. President.
Morning.
Mayor Scott, Comptroller Henry, and distinguished board members. My name is Quentin Herbert. I am the Director of Human Resources. With me, I have Michael Tate, who is our Assistant Deputy of Operations, and our newly hired and recruited Chief of Recruitment, Conrad Samuels, with me this morning. We did have a presentation.
Person's name. Who's presenting?
I am. Oh, Tanya Brinkley. But she's not presenting the,
No, she just needs to share her screen.
yeah. We can, if we can,
Nope. She's getting it.
I don't believe that Tanya Brinkley is going to share her screen. I didn't know that we had to have someone to share the screen. I sent the deck yesterday afternoon to, I thought that, okay.
Oh, well, we can do it. Just bumps in the road. There's always a tech glitch every meeting. I told you, there's always a tech glitch every meeting. Every meeting. Sometimes they're in here and then like, Comcast, we have an outage and turn TV goes off and we gotta stop.
Thank you for not allowing technology to rain on my first parade. Mr. Herbert?
Thank you. Again, I want to first thank the audits team. This was a very collaborative and congenial exercise. Want to begin by dealing with the singular finding. We concur with the finding overall that the capabilities of Workday are not being fully utilized to track and monitor the efficiency of the overall hiring process. I think it's also important to note as a caveat that audits looked at civil service positions only. We have civil service positions which are governed by the civil service rules, and we have non-civil service positions which agencies have much more latitude in how they onboard and hire into those positions. It's also worth noting that a significant portion of the audit period involved the go-live period of Workday recruitment. As many of you know, Workday was implemented in 3 phases. Recruitment was in phase 3, which took place in December of 2022. And the period that was analyzed, staff were learning to navigate this new system and may not have been utilizing tools that they are currently utilizing today. Next slide. We concur again with the Department of Audits that agencies are not fully utilizing the candidate steps within the recruitment process. Comptroller Henry, I think you alluded to our quest to be data-driven in our leadership. And as the old adage goes, garbage in, garbage out. And so if we are not utilizing and moving candidates along in each step in that process, we don't have, from a system standpoint, an accurate view of where candidates are in the process to identify where the bottlenecks are. There are a number of things that we've done to address that. We'll get to those in a moment. But we also concur with the Department of Audits that the agency recruiters are not as familiar as they could be with the reporting functionality of Workday. And so we do agree that additional training is necessary. And that gets us into our action plan, which can be divided into 3 separate phases. A process improvement action, which some of those actions were taking place even before the audit, training and reporting, and then monitoring. With respect to process improvement, in August of 2023, we started a process improvement process with several of the city agencies who have the largest number of requisitions. So DGS, BSIT, the Health Department, and DOT, and DHR's internal recruitment team began to work to, first of all, map out the recruitment process. And believe it or not, each agency brought their recruitment map to the office, and each agency had its own separate recruitment process and recruitment map, which is one of the inefficiencies. If a candidate is applying for a job in the city of Baltimore, it should not matter what agency they are applying to. The process should be the same. So if I'm applying to a job in DPW, that process should mirror the process if I'm applying for a job at the city council. That was not taking place. And so that process improvement was to formulate a singular process map for the recruitment process that we would all follow and push out as a best practice. We paused that work when the audit began because we didn't want to change processes in the middle of an audit, but that work is now ongoing with those agencies. We also did something that is a best practice across the industry. We separated shared services from recruitment. Here in the city, we had an Office of Shared Services and Recruitment. Shared Services provides core HR services to those agencies that do not have HR practitioners, and also serves as a support for those agencies that do. That chief was in charge of both shared services and recruitment. That is not a best practice. We were able to use in existing funds to create a chief of recruitment position. We were able to recruit and hire Conrad Samuels, who brings a wealth of experience around recruitment, and he will be the sole executive responsible for the recruitment process to ensure that those process improvements and best practices are deployed across the city's enterprise. Aside from process improvement measures, we also are going to be more proactive with respect to training and reporting. We are going to implement quarterly refresher recruiter training, along with requiring those who are in that role as an agency recruiter to complete Workday training before they are granted those security access to serve in that capacity. What we have found is that we offered training at the go-live period, we offered job aids, and our Office of Learning and Development repeatedly gets questions around routine functions of how do I do this? And it's in the training and it's in the job aid. And so what we want to do is make sure that those folks are comfortable in the training that they've received and can perform those functions, and those quarterly touch points along with the required training for those coming into the role, we think will go a long way in helping those who serve in that role to utilize the tools that they have at their capacity with the system. We also will provide additional guidance to agencies to use what type of job requisition, whether it be civil service or non, based on the number and types of vacancies. And we will update our recruitment job aids. Conrad is in the process right now of reviewing all of those job aids and providing updates and the expectation of agencies within Workday, such as entering or moving candidates through each step in the process. Another thing that we're talking about, Mr. President, which is a bane of my existence, is agencies closing the loop on candidates, where if an offer letter is issued, there should also be a letter or communication that goes out to those unsuccessful candidates that lets them know that the process for them for that position is over, right? That's a normal expectation when you apply for a job. And we find that as candidates are not moved through that process, there is no trigger that will let us know that that has not been done. And that brings me to the last point with respect to our action plan, and that goes around monitoring. Although we do not control the overall recruitment process, and I kind of want to push back a little bit on the audit, we have service level agreements with the time frames for the things that DHR is responsible for, and we are able to show every requisition and every recruitment where we were with that service level agreement, whether we met our mark or not. And then there are responsibilities that the agency is responsible for with respect to onboarding and hiring staff that we have no control over. We are not an agency that can mandate that an agency do certain things. That said, we will develop and have already begun the process of developing an internal recruitment review process. We are modeling it after the city STAT process, where we have a dashboard that is being built. It's in the testing phase that will allow us to see where the greatest number of vacancies are across the city, where we are from a standpoint of have requisitions been put in for those positions, what agencies have the largest number of outstanding requisitions, which will allow us to do more engagement and outreach to the agencies with respect to their recruitment activities. I would be remiss if I didn't close by highlighting our recruitment team. I think that they do a phenomenal job. There are 5 people in DHR's Office of Recruitment who handle all of the requisitions that come through our office. And I just want to say that in calendar year 2023, DHR's recruitment staff processed 2,305 job requisitions that were submitted by agencies and referred over 57,000 candidates to agencies for consideration. In calendar year 24 through December 15th, we processed 2,877 job requisitions, and we referred nearly 80,000 candidates to agencies for consideration. So it's a small team, but they do a phenomenal job in meeting those service level agreements with a volume that is insane. And so with that, I would be glad to take any questions.
I have a few questions, but want to recognize the mayor, who also has some questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Reverend Director. Just to go back to the auditor's finding about the bottlenecks and your point about how the data is getting inputted. Walk us through how you're working with your brother and sister agencies outside of DJS, or whether you're just duplicating Burkay to get to with all the other agency directors on how to put the information in. What processes are you guys going to make sure that the other agencies understand and that the people that are in those roles have the capability to use the system in the way that we need to have that data put in the right way?
Yep, great question. Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. A couple of things. First, we're utilizing the touch points that we currently have with the HR practitioners. We host a biweekly call, HR Conversations with the HR practitioners. We also have an HR Leaders Call, which is more strategic and focuses on the HR leaders, where we are routinely bringing this information to bear and reminding them that their recruiters need to put this information in. I think that what the data would show is that we are looking a lot better today than we were during the period that the audit looked at. And that's simply by virtue of the fact that people are becoming more familiar with the system. Another thing, and I'm glad that you mentioned DGS and Burkay. I had this discussion with Burkay. One of the things that he's utilizing is the tools that are in Workday to create the dashboard where he can look and see what recruitments he has out there, where they are with them, and put that downward pressure on his team to get those positions recruited and filled. We are using DGS as a super user example and having them to come and to share with the HR community about their successes, their challenges, and they are one of the agencies that is working with us on the process improvement piece as well. And I think it's accountability. I think that some of the information that was in the audit report talked about standardizing certain processes, and that's that HR standardization piece that we've been talking about for a couple of years around, at a minimum, having a dotted line reporting into central DHR for those who perform those core HR functions, so that we can have a level of accountability when we see that there are agencies who are not inputting the data, who are not moving candidates along, because what we see with some agencies is that there's a requisition and then there's a hire. And we don't see when the person was interviewed. We don't see when the person was contacted. All we see is the requisition and the hire. And they need to move the candidates along so that we know, one, that we have an equitable and fair hiring process, but two, back to the comptroller's point, we have that data, as you so often say, men lie, women lie, data don't lie. And we don't have that ability right now, but we're working to get there.
And so my question to you is, do we have the ability in the system to not allow them to go from that point without implementing all the other things, make all those other things requirements in order for them to send out the hiring?
We can definitely investigate that. That may require some configuration changes. We can definitely explore that, and I think that's a good idea.
That way they can't do it without it, and that's a constant reminder for all of them, because we just have to just remember, not all of the directors and folks are going to be former HR practitioners like Burke, who's always going to be pushing down on that information. So I just want to make sure that we are accomplishing that goal, but make sure that we use the reason why we have this system and we went away from paper and pigeon notes is that we want to make sure that we have the best data. But that depends on the people implementing and using that system. And my last question, Mr. President, is do we still think that we need further training for the folks who are going to be inputting that data to get them up to speed, and what's the plan for that?
Yes, we do believe that additional training is required. One of the things that I was very proud to host just a few weeks ago, we had Elevate HR, which was an HR training for all HR practitioners, folks who do this work in the agency. And recruitment was one of the modules that we went through in that training, and reinforced and recapitulated the critical importance of following this process, is going through. This is where the job aids are. We do have a SharePoint site that only the HR community has access to that has all of the job aids, all of the links to the video trainings. They have all of this information available to them and showing them in real time. The training was in person so that we could get that personal touch. This is where the information is. Do you have any questions, right? And again, I think that there's a culture change that is happening. And I think one of the biggest tools that we have, or arrows that we have in our quiver when we talk about culture change, is the level of accountability. And I think that we're getting there.
And you're using OPI to help build your dashboard, right?
We built it in Workday. Our HRIT team built it in Workday.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Comptroller?
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Good morning.
But, Mr. Mayor, I think that's an excellent idea in terms of just making the changes in Workday so that that information has to be inputted. I would like to hope that since that suggestion came from the mayor, it could maybe skip the often lengthy process of what has to be gone through in terms of getting the gods of Workday together to review a suggested change. And maybe we could skip straight to the actual implementation of that. And I'm looking to see, I see one of the other gods of Workday here, and we can get a message to Todd that maybe we can just move forward with implementing that, because I think the mayor is absolutely right. That would address the problems right at the onset if people have to put that data in. I do have what might be more of a culture question, and this goes back to a request that, or maybe proposal is a better word for it, a proposal that HR had made previously about trying to have a more centralized existence in terms of the functions of human resources throughout city agencies, in the same way that BSIT has really centralized IT more effectively. The sort of hybrid arrangement we have now, where there is a central human resources, but there are also pockets of human resources spread out among the agencies, and in the bigger agencies, those pockets are significant. I think that leads to what I will use as the nice term would be confused expectations. The less nice term is finger pointing. Has there been further conversation about this audit and the fact that there is often a lack of agency behavior and reaction that is consistent with what central HR would prefer or would propose, but doesn't have the authority to enforce? Has there been any more discussion or movement towards pulling everybody back in to be more fully under HR, even if they remain physically embedded in the departments that they work?
Yeah, there have been some discussions around that, and we worked with BSIT on their standardization, and we looked at IT, HR, and quite frankly, and finance, right, as those core support agencies. Those are ongoing discussions around not just in the HR space, but also in the finance space, much like the legal space, where you may have an attorney that is in an agency, but ultimately that attorney has even if it's a strong dotted line into our solicitor supervises their work. We are having those discussions about how we can standardize not only in the HR space, but in the finance space as well.
Okay, I just want you to know I was listening to all of that. It's taken me 4 years, but I've gotten to the point where I can take input from the mayor in this ear while continuing to process the testimony that's coming here.
That's why you have 2 ears.
It's why I have 2 ears, exactly. And I take the mayor's comments to point that we're a big family here in Baltimore City, and even if we have one problem child that might be a particular impediment in bringing the family together, we can find a way. So, all right. Okay. The other question was with the selected agencies, and this is where I noticed there was only one intersection between the group of agencies that you were already working with on changes before the audit began, and then the selected agencies that the audit chose. There was one intersection point, which was DOT. And I was just curious, if you just looked at DOT, how are you finding moving forward with the audit's findings, specifically on DOT?
Great question, and thank you for that. I will say that DOT has had a bit of turnover in that role, the lead HR role, and that oversight piece has kind of been suffered as a result. However, I do have a fantastic working relationship with their current HR chief, Jamar Rain, where he actually started in DHR and is a mentee of mine of sorts. And so I do feel that the oversight now is there. Also, an understanding of the policies and procedures is there. It's making sure that the right people are in the recruiter seat and that they understand the expectations and are held accountable on that.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but you just made an incredibly insightful statement when you said that you, as the head of HR, have a great working relationship with the top HR person in one of the agencies, which I think speaks volumes to the hybrid nature of how we're trying to do HR, where you don't necessarily have authority or a reporting relationship, but you are getting work done because you have a good personal working relationship. And speaking as someone for whom the vast majority of city employees have no direct supervisory relationship with the comptroller's office, I understand that point, but I also know the difficulties that we work with in trying to achieve our objectives. So that gives me very personal insight into what you're going through trying to achieve yours. So good luck.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. I was talking to the comptroller while he was listening, and I was going to wait to say this, but I think, Mr. Comptroller, the city administrator and I have already talked with Quentin and the team, and centralizing all parts of HR that we can centralize without getting ourselves into any trouble is the intent for us to do as we go through next year's budget and through the fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And look, I want to just lift up both of my colleagues' comments. Number one is we're hearing consistent concerns about Workday and its implementation. And like any data system, if folks are unable to effectively utilize the various functions of it, it doesn't work. And we're going to have a conversation later today about a certain agency that's frustrated because as they progress and as folks get promotions, they are the pay scale is not catching up. And so I wanted to ask specifically as it relates to equipping agency folks and equipping your department to effectively utilize Workday, what is a realistic timeline on when that can happen? Because I think like many American cities right now, we have a real workforce shortage challenge, and hiring top flight talent to fill our agency roles and just hiring Baltimoreans to do the work is critically important for our city.
Great question. I'll say this. The training that we provide is just that. We provide the training. Like any other job, folks become proficient as they perform in the job, right? I don't know that standing here, I can put a time frame on when folks will become proficient. I'm not going to prognosticate or pretend to be a fortune teller. What I can say is that we've committed to doing the work where no one can say, I did not know how to do that, or I did not have the tools to know to advance that. Unfortunately, with the work that is with the agency HR offices are performing, for whatever reason, the advancement of candidates through the recruitment process in the system is not a priority when it should be. And I think we all agree with that. And I think we all agree that we've spent a lot of time and resources in implementing this ERP system to give us the data tools that we need to be able to make the best decisions as a city. And I think that, again, we can continue to provide that training. We're going to provide it on a quarterly basis just for this training. But we've also committed ourselves to providing training for all HR practitioners in the agencies on an ongoing basis to sit down and address not only this recruitment issue, but if there are any other systemic issues that we are finding across the HR service delivery across the city's enterprise, how we can improve processes and get better together. That's something that we are committed to do today and will be committed to tomorrow. I will say that, again, the audit looked at a period of time when the system was being implemented and was relatively new. I believe if we look at the data today, we will see that we have incrementally gotten better in terms of how we are utilizing the system in recruitment. I think that we will continue to get better as, one, folks become more proficient in utilizing the system, but two, the resources that we have available and are bringing to bear for those who perform this function will provide the aids that they need to do the job effectively.
And yet, and still, we have agencies that are struggling on one side or the other to utilize this system. So I would say, while the audit, I understand that it was several years or a couple years past, I would say that this remains a concern across the city government of Baltimore. My second question, and just want to uplift what the comptroller was asking about and then what the mayor mentioned, I do think there is this friction between your shop and the shops that you work with, again, with the exception of Burke, who comes out of HR world, and I think has been able to effectively utilize tools and hire folks quickly. Can you give a timeline to what the mayor was saying about a greater centralization? Because I think that has, in several cases, created challenges around how agencies and or your shop is helping to expedite bringing folks on. And I see the city
I'm gonna defer to
administrator.
the city administrator
and
on that question.
we'll recognize Administrator Leach.
All right. Good morning, honorable members of the board. My name is Faith Leach, and I serve as the city's chief administrative officer. So to respond to your question about the centralization of DHR as a part of the city's 10-year financial plan, we actually have a government efficiency section of the plan, and there are a number of services and or agency functions that we are looking to identify opportunities to perform better and or to be more efficient, which would, in some instances, save the city money. And so that plan will be ready in March or April this year prior to the FY26 budget.
And in turn, you mentioned the plan will be ready in March or April. What's the thought on when we begin to implement? Specifically,
it's
to the point about this
Yeah.
function of centralization of HR
Yeah,
capacity.
so it's a 10-year financial plan, and so essentially it's providing our outlook over time. I think when it comes to the centralization of particular functions within the plan, there will be specific timeframes over the course of the next 4 years of this administration, where we will be looking through the budget process to shift aspects of work that are happening in different departments into a more centralized function. So it won't all be done in one fell swoop. We want to be very thoughtful and responsible about how we shift and adjust our government. And so the plan will kind of provide the overall framework, and then we'll be working with the agencies in order to implement over the course of the next 4 years.
Appreciate the thoughtfulness and would just balance it with urgency around, as you and I have
Yeah.
discussed on numerous occasions, just the need to bring talent and bring,
Yeah.
replenish our workforce.
So I think there's a couple of things. I think there are opportunities, and I think the auditor used the term low-hanging fruit. And I think the director and the mayor and we all could agree that there are opportunities for process improvement that don't require centralization. I think centralization is the long-term goal, and that is something that we have to be methodical about and very intentional about, because we are going to be actually shifting parts of our government. That does not mean, though, that we have to wait 2 years or even wait until March to start to build some efficiencies. And so I think what you are hearing from me and what you've heard from the mayor and or the director is that we will move with that same urgency around fixing that low-hanging fruit and those opportunities to better utilize those tools within Workday so that we're capturing data, that we're identifying where there might be bottlenecks and making those reforms now with the current structure that we have while we work to move to a more centralized HR function.
I appreciate the urgency around the immediate as well as the longer term. I think it will be a relief for many of our city agencies. And I think if we can demonstrate efficacy in utilizing DHR as a central operating vehicle to get folks hired in the city, I think it will save some headaches. So I
Absolutely.
am very much looking forward to updates both on the low-hanging fruit, short-term, and the medium and longer-term plan as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Administrator.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Gotcha. Seeing no further questions, I entertain a motion.
These audits just get noted.
Okay, noted. The next can be found on page 3, SB And thank you, Mr. Herbert. SB 24-14768, Department of Audits. This request is to note the biennial performance audit of DHR for fiscal years 2022 and 2023 on behalf of the audit department.
That was the one we just did.
That was the one we just did.
Next one is 14770.
Got it. The next item can be found on pages 339 and 340. It's not this one.
Because there's two audits. Yeah, there's page 4.
Got it. All right. Got it. The next item can be found on page 4, SB 24-14770, Department of Audits. This request is to note the biennial performance audit of the Department of Transportation for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. On behalf of the Audit Department, we have City Auditor Josh Pash. Again, Mr. Auditor, floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, honorable members. My name is Josh Pash, I'm the City Auditor, and I am here to present the Department of Transportation biennial performance audit, where we looked at the effectiveness of minor privilege process. I do apologize. I think I was supposed to present this first, and I did DHR, which is your mix-up, but that one's on me. Next slide. So I will go over our audit objectives and scope, the types of risk we identified, our audit methodology, some background information, the findings, and then the implementation status of the prior year findings.
1398.
Next slide. Our audit objective was to assess the effectiveness of the minor privilege process and to follow up on the prior findings for the DOT in the previous biennial audit that was dated July 18th, 2023, and our scope was fiscal years 23 and 22. Next slide, please. The two major risk types that we identified were operational risks and fraud risks. Next slide, please. Our audit methodology. We reviewed applicable policies and procedures and other relevant information associated with the minor privilege application process. That will be noted in findings 1 and 4. We interviewed key individuals from DOT to obtain an understanding of the processes, procedures, and systems relevant to the audit objectives. That will be noted in findings 2, 3, and 5. We evaluated processes and controls to confirm whether identified minor privilege permit applications process risks are properly addressed. That will be addressed and noted in findings 1 and 4. Next slide, please. We stratified the minor privilege applications for fiscal years 23 and 22 to perform efficiency tests to determine an average number of days to process each type of permit. When we stratified, that means we looked at and spread them to the different types of permits and did an analysis that way. And then we randomly selected 40 samples to verify that all supporting documentation, such as site plans, drawings, other required approvals, were included in the file, and that would be to evidence the decision made by the minor privilege section. Next slide, please. Okay, to give some background, the minor privilege process. So it begins with the applicant submitting an application. That would include site plans, required receipts, and any documentation as needed by the DOT minor privilege section. That is often done in person, but it can also be submitted electronically. Department of Transportation, the MPS works with the applicant to ensure documents are correct. So they do a pre-screening to make sure that everything was correctly submitted. And then MPS obtains approvals from agencies that are involved in the process, and that is budgeted to take 3 weeks. In some cases, the applicant also needs to get other permits, such as use and occupancy permit from the DHCD, and the minor privilege section will communicate with the DHCD to make sure that that process and permit application has also been submitted, and they're working on that. And then the budget of 3 weeks, again, that's a budget for agencies, is giving them sufficient time to evaluate the site plans and what other applications or documents that they need. And after that, the MPS will submit the approved application and permit to BOE for approval. And then once it's been approved, they go back to the MPS section and they will pay to Department of Finance. And in some cases, the permit is an annual fee, and that is submitted to Department of Finance, and they will set it up in the system that BSIT will mail out those annual permit bills. So for fiscal year '22, we noted that there was 75 permit requests received and 60 were approved. In '23, there were 45 received and 37 approved. This data comes from the MPS Access database that they use to track the permits, and that data was obtained from their system as of September 3rd, 2024. Next slide, please. Okay, so our first finding is that DOT does not effectively communicate minor privilege permit requirements to the applicants. We noted that the DOT's minor privilege permit procedures and relevant document requests are posted on their website. Those are outdated, and they are not consistent with the DOT's current practices. We also noted that the application requirements communicated on the DOT website are not available in multiple languages. So the effect, without periodically updating the application procedures, permits may be processed incorrectly. Succession planning and succession of people involved in the process may be negatively affected without those procedures to guide. And then unnecessary delays may arise in the minor privilege application process. We worked with the agency to identify the causes. The cause we identified is the steps in the process and processing minor privilege applications were modified during COVID, and they were not updated at that time. The DOT realized that modified documentation was needed, and they scheduled some sessions with staff to document those processes, but a comprehensive review was not yet completed, and these activities were impacted by resources and time constraints. A recommendation to the Director of Transportation is to periodically review and document application procedures and other relevant documentation that's posted on the website, and to communicate those procedure changes to everyone involved in the process, both internal and those posting onto the website. And then to consider making information available in multiple languages so that we can serve the diverse population of Baltimore City. Our second finding was that system limitation unclear procedures hinder DOT from tracking and monitoring efficiency and effectiveness of the minor privilege permit review and approval process. We found that the current DOT Access database, which they use internally to track the permit process, has fields to record the dates when DOT refers applications to other agencies. However, these fields have not been consistently used, and other than the fields for the referral dates, there are no additional fields or tracking of dates to record when the DOT follows up with those agencies or even when the DOT receives the agency approval. Additionally, as we discussed in finding 1, it's not clear which permits require other agencies' approval, and DOT does not track relevant dates to monitor the efficiency of the permit application process. Referring to that is, depending on the permit, there are other agencies which need to do the approval process, such as fire, police, planning, and which agency goes to depends on what the permit is, and it is not clear of which agencies are needed for which permit review. Next slide. So the effect, without monitoring the efficiency of permits, DOT does not know how long it takes to complete a permit review process and to identify areas to improve. We found that in fiscal year '22, permits could take a minimum of 13 days, a maximum of 240 days, and the average was about 29 days. For fiscal '23, the minimum turnover was 3 days, the maximum was 113 days, and the average was 36 days. And this was data that was analyzed from DOT's internal tracking system, that Access database. Next slide. Also put things in perspective. So the average number of days for minor privilege permit processing for fiscal year '23, the chart, the size of the bars represents the average number of days, and then the number underneath the type of permit, for instance, awnings 4, that is the number of permit applications that were approved during that period. And then we again got this information from the DOT's Access database as of September 3rd, 2024. And I just want to note that there are certain permit types that are not included here, and some numbers. We excluded them from analysis, such as bus shelters, dumpsters, and some of these were approved by DOT, but the BOE approval dates were not recorded, and therefore we didn't have the data to include them in the chart. And then some applications, as you'll note, the number of applications that were submitted are not on the chart because some of those were withdrawn by the applicants, and so they are not included in the chart either. Next slide, please. For fiscal year 22, you'll notice that there are more categories because there was more of those types of permits approved and requested, and more dates. However, we also did note that for permits such as dumpsters, that those permits were approved by the BOE. However, they did not have the BOE approval date. They are approved by DOT, and those dates were included, but the BOE approval dates were not recorded. Therefore, we didn't have the data to include them in the chart. Next slide, please. Finding 2 recommendation. So a recommendation is to start tracking all key dates, including the application submission date, a referral date to the agencies, if there's any follow-up dates with the agencies, and then the approval date from the agencies, therefore to track that efficiency, and then the DOT's approval date and the BOE approval date, to periodically identify those bottlenecks and to monitor the efficiency of the minor privilege permit process. Next slide. Finding 3, the DOT does not consistently follow the minor privilege review process. We found that DOT does not consistently maintain documentation for the minor privilege application process. We looked at 40 applications, and we were unable to determine whether these applications required other agencies' approval. So we were unable to test whether non-use and occupancy related applications to other agencies that turn around, and we were not able to validate 2 of the applications that were withdrawn by applicants. They were noted, but we could not find documentation to support that. And then we were not able to review 4 applications because the DOT was unable to provide us the application package for us to review. Of the 34 remaining applications tested, we were unable to determine whether the adjoining property owners were notified for 13 of those applications. Part of the process when submits a permit application is they have to notify their neighbors of the application, and that is part of the packet for the permit application. And for 13, we were not able to validate that because they weren't available. And then we did not see any evidence or consistent evidence of review of the approval of the chief of right-of-way. Next slide, please. Okay. The effect, without retaining documentation consistently for the application reviews, DOT cannot demonstrate that all the applications that should have been approved were properly approved and that all applications that should have been rejected were properly rejected. Our recommendation is that they need to document what permit types require other agencies' approvals so that they know if they've got all the approvals to approve an application. Consistently retain documentation to demonstrate that the DOT compliance permit review requirements, and then to formally sign or initial or date approval of the chief of right-of-way on the application to evidence that that independent review occurred. Next slide, please. Okay. Finding 4, minor privilege permit processing duties not fully segregated. So we noted that the minor privilege permit process includes acceptance of the permit request, review and approval, collection of payment, and then issuance of the permit, and recording of those permits into their tracking system, which is their access database. We found that they are not fully segregating these duties. So without any oversight, the MPS office support specialist performs custody. They maintain the blank stock of permits. They perform the issuance, which means they record the permit numbers on the blank permit, and they issue the permit to the applicant, and then they are recording those permits into their tracking system. Next slide, please. Okay. The effect. Since the MPS office support specialist controls each of these duties, they can readily commit fraud because of custody issuance or HIDE, which is recording the fraudulent activities. Again, I want to note the bold line is that we did not find any instances of fraud. However, when we were doing our risk assessment, we identified both the risk of error and both the risk of fraud in this process due to lack of segregation of duties. Going to the second bullet, if there was sufficient segregation of duties, there would be difficult to commit fraud, and also errors are more likely to be captured. And then, again, to note that we did not find instances of fraud, but we want to highlight how important it is that this gap of segregation of duties can be to the process. So going into a scenario is that permits may be issued without payment to the city because of these lack of segregation duties. And then if it was, basically the city would be unable to collect payments, whether it's for annual permits because they would not be recorded sent to Department of Finance, BRC, and then also notified to BSIT to send out those bills. And that would be a risk to not collect the current permit fee or annual permit fees if it was an annual permit. Next slide, please. Okay, so the cause. The previous MPS supervisor retired in 2014, and the position was not backfilled. So this position reported directly to the chief of right-of-way, and as a result, the minor privilege daily job duties were not divided, and they all fell onto one dedicated employee. So our recommendation is that the director segregate the custody, issuance, and recording duties, and we gave examples of how that could be done. So the chief of right-of-way or their designee who is not involved in the minor privilege permit process should maintain the blank permit forms. And then the chief of right-of-way should assign the permit number on the blank permits and issue the permit to the applicants after the after he or the designee confirms cash receipt by Department of Finance. So basically having the inventory of permits and then the issuance of permits and then also confirmation of the cash receipt should be divided. And the recommendation here is the chief of right-of-way, but the chief of right-of-way can establish anyone they want to. So finding 5, the DOT does not have a succession plan for the key role in the minor privilege permit process. This referring to the MPS office specialist that we mentioned previous. So that person is the key person in making sure that the minor privilege process works and moves, and they have been working in the city for about 37 years. There are no backup personnel for that position, and they do not have internal policies and procedures to define the roles and responsibilities of the DOT personnel involved in that process. So basically, if the person retires or takes a vacation for 2 months, it would be extremely difficult to perform those duties because that expertise is with one person, and they don't have written procedures and policies to assist a substitute. So the cause, as we mentioned, the previous supervisor of the section retired in 2014, and it has not been filled. Next slide. So the effect. So basically, the MPS office support specialist, their years of experience, institutional knowledge cannot be easily replicated if the person leaves the city. And our recommendation is to establish formal policies and procedures to define the roles and responsibilities of the DOT personnel involved in this process and to develop job aids to assist anyone who needs to pick up the process. Next slide, please. So the next objective was to evaluate the effect, the status of the prior year finding. So the prior year objective was to determine whether DOT's federal project closeout process is efficient and effective. So basically, we have in the city a lot of capital projects that are federally funded, and those projects need to be closed out both on the city's books and also with the federal agency. So the prior year finding was the DOT does not effectively monitor to make certain that certain projects are closed out within a reasonable time frame, which could result in delayed payments from state highway administration. State highway is the pass-through from the federal highway administration. So that is who the city deals with when it comes to federal funding. So the significant delays are because the DOT does not have established timeframes to complete one key task to another, and the processes are divided among a number of divisions, and there is not one centralized division such as contract administration to track and monitor the key tasks and to make sure they're completed and that they're moving along. So basically, the way that each section who's involved in the contract closeout process knows it's up to them is when the packet for the project is delivered at their door, and then they pick it up and they process it, and then they deliver it to the next person. We also noted that the DOT was not able to provide documentation for 7 of our samples, and we noted that of 11 samples that they did have documentation, we identified delays ranging from 16 months to 235 months, approximately 19 years, from the completion of the construction to the reimbursement voucher. Again, we looked at when the project was physically completed to when it was closed out, both on the city side and the federal government side. Next slide. Okay. So our prior recommendations were to establish timeframes to complete one key task to another. Our audit assessment was that DOT has established those timeframes. Our next recommendation was to grant authority to contract administration so that they can be a central point to track and monitor to make sure the key tasks are completed based on those established timeframes. We noted that the DOT has an informal standard operating procedure to grant the contract administration authority to do that role of tracking and monitoring and make sure that they're completed within the timeframes. And then the last of our prior recommendations was to maintain documentation to track and monitor the key dates. So the DOT plans on doing this with a system which they are current in the process of implementing, which is Unifier. And since that system has not gone live and not fully working, the finding will be followed up by us in our 2026 audit. Next slide, please. Okay. I will like to thank our audit team for their work on this audit, and also Department of Transportation, which worked well with us and made this audit a process which we are able to complete and hopefully provide very helpful recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor. Are there questions from the board?
Oh.
Mr. Comptroller?
Just one for you, which is when the chart that showed the average amount of time between the 2 years for processing a minor privilege permit. I noticed that both the minimum amount of time and the maximum amount of time went up from fiscal 22 to fiscal 23. I'm sorry, the minimum and the maximum both went down, but the average went up. And I wondered if there was anything that you came across to explain why that would have been, or if that was just a fluke of the data.
Yeah, that's just the calculation.
Okay, all right. All right. That was the only question I had for audits. Okay.
Hey, Mr. Comptroller, seeing no further questions, is there a response from the Department of Transportation? And I believe they have a presentation as well.
Good morning, Mayor Scott, Council President Cohen, and Comptroller Henry, and distinguished members of the Board of Estimates. I'm Biobia Aquilo, and I am currently the Interim Director for DOT. We want to thank Mr. Bosch and his team for the audit. While it's never pleasant to have findings when an audit is completed, we do look at this as an opportunity. We recognize this is an opportunity to improve our internal processes, our procedures, and build efficiencies in our day-to-day work, and to take the necessary steps to course correct. Before we go into the presentation, as we go through each finding, we recognize there are some things that we need to immediately do, understanding that we need to look at best practices, we need to look at technology, collaboration with our sister agencies such as BSID and DHR, and make those steps to move forward. And we are committed to doing that as we prepare for our new director to start January 13th. So we're going to go ahead and go into the presentation now. And behind me, just also want to mention, we have our Deputy Director, Tavon Braxton, and our Chief of Right-of-Way, Adam Cloud. Finding 1. The Department of Transportation does not effectively communicate minor privilege permit requirements to applicants. With this process, our action steps, we've determined that we need to review our processes with all relevant agencies. We need to modify our public-facing documents and complete an annual review to ensure accuracy. So part of that process, I've asked our communications team to immediately do an assessment, not only of our right-of-way page, but of every page within the DOT portfolio to ensure that it is up to standard and it reflects post-COVID information. Right now, the status is that we will collaborate with the appropriate entities to make sure that our minor privilege SOP is updated. And we've identified the public-facing language that needs to be removed from the SOP and move to the SOP and from the application. We anticipate the full implementation as of March 31st, 2025. The second finding, the DOT does not consistently follow the minor privilege due process. With that, it was determined that sign-offs are needed by the division chiefs, and with that, we will immediately implement sign-off sheets to include each file with the division chiefs or a designee signature. We will also complete a monthly internal audit of all applications to ensure proper documentation and tracking is completed. Additionally, these changes will be reflected in our SOP, and I also want to mention that we do have a newly hired chief of operational excellence, and he's charged with not only knowledge capture, but also SOPs throughout the agency. Lastly, part of the process is, of course, sign-off sheets to be implemented and formulating the status is also formulating the internal audit process. Again, the implementation date we see for this is March 31st, 2025. The third finding, system limitations and unclear procedures prohibit DOT from tracking and monitoring efficiency of minor privilege permit review. Again, we are committed to monthly review of applications to ensure proper data documentation, data entry, and tracking. This is another instance clearly of taking advantage of technology that's in front of us. We're looking to scan documents to ensure that the identification of what we're putting in the system is kept. Additionally, we are going to use certain fields as part of the current status that is currently in our current database to actually track the progress and identify potential bottlenecks. I also want to mention, as listening to the presentation from the Audit Department, it has clearly demonstrated we need to have a dashboard, right, to actually track real time of what we're putting in, looking at the data to make sure that we're moving forward. I am committed to getting that process started as we, again, wait for our new director to start, but we will make steps to immediately get that going. Clearly, it is needed. The fourth finding, the minor privilege permit processing duties are not fully segregated. The action there is that clearly we need to restructure the road department to ensure efficiency and oversight of the minor privilege process. We're working with our DHR team now and the receiving departments. One of the lines that we use internally is that if someone should hit the lottery, what will happen to that process, knowing that if it's gatekeeping or just all the information, I guess, or it's with one individual, it will be problematic for us as an agency, and it's not operational best practices. So we are making steps now to hire additional staff to train in the minor privilege process. And so that really goes in line with the finding for number 5, which indicates the DOT does not have a succession plan for the key role in the minor privilege permit process. And that goes in line to ensuring that we don't have one person doing all the work. We know that's not best practices, and we're making steps to change that. Additionally, I just also want to mention I've asked our policy team to take a look at other jurisdictions, to look at best practices, knowing that we're not the only ones doing this work, to look at cities such as DC, St. Louis, Detroit, to find out what works for them, and how we can kind of piggyback off of what they're doing and improve our services. With both of those findings, 4 and 5, we anticipate for the restructuring to be completed by March 31st. And additionally, one of the recommendations, which we do agree, of course, is to hire and to have job aids completed, and we are committed to doing that as well. And that concludes our presentation. And is there any questions?
Mr. Comptroller.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for stepping up and doing such a great job. And also, I appreciate the attitude that DOT has taken working with audits on this in terms of, yes, it's just about trying to help you be as good as you can be. I think you explained what you're already preparing to do to deal with the segregation of duties in your presentation, so I thank you for that. What I was curious, and I know that I don't think this came up in the audit, but the audit did spark this question. Do you monitor any customer service or customer experience metrics related to minor privileges in specific?
That is a great question. To my knowledge, we do not, but I do believe that is something that we should be implementing to improve our services overall.
Yeah.
We do have a data team, and of course, we work closely with OPI, and that's something that we should look into as we, look to improve our overall services.
If you're going to build a dashboard, that I would imagine that would be an easy, or if not easy, at least important contribution to it. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, but thank you. That was my only question.
Other questions from the board? Well, just to echo, the comptrollers greatly appreciate you stepping into this interim role. Looking forward to the new director coming on board, but thank you for doing the work that you're doing.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Seeing no further questions, I will note this item. The next item can be found on pages 339 and 340, SB 2413988, Department of Transportation. This request is to approve an award of Paniagua Enterprises, and apologies if I got the name wrong, Inc. for TR 232004R Inspire Schools Sidewalk Reconstruction. A protest has been received. J. Villa Construction, on behalf of DOT, we have Viobia again. The floor is yours.
All right, good morning again. So with this protest, of course, J. Villa, as indicated, filed a protest based on the WBE calculation, where the supplier 25% versus manufacturer 100%, counting towards the WBE participation, and that low bidder incorrectly multiplied the quantity and price for items 602. Pangua submitted the bid price, which was indeed $925,575, which was incorrect, but item 602 sidewalk was multiplied incorrectly. Sinbad stated that they will actually stand by their initial approval. The reason is that when an error is made in mathematics where the unit prices do not equal the total price in all cases, the unit price shall prevail and the bidder's mathematics error shall be corrected, which figure shall be binding on the bidder. And this is the reason why Pangua is the winning bidder.
Are there questions from members of the board? City Administrator Leach.
Yes, thank you, Director Aquilo. You stated that the referenced unit price would prevail. Is that in the Green Book? Where does it state that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for that. It is actually in the Green Book, and it is in Section 002, 113-08, Item D. And it states, when there is an error in mathematics where unit prices do not equal the total price, in all cases, the unit prices shall prevail.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Okay. Thank you. At this time, the board will hear from J. Villa Construction. Representing the protest, we have
J. Villa President Alliance.
Is the protester is online? Can the protester introduce themselves?
Yes. Good morning, board. My name is Jimmy Villa. Can you hear me well?
We can't see you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Jimmy Villa, representing J Villa Construction Incorporated. I appreciate the opportunity to address you today regarding our bid protest contract TR 23004R, the Inspire School Sidewalk Reconstruction Project. First, I want to emphasize that J Villa Construction submitted a fully responsive and responsible bid, meeting the requirements outlined in the invitation for bids. Unfortunately, we believe that Panigawa's bid contains critical deficiencies that render it non-responsive, as detailed in my protest we submitted. PEI's bid fails to meet the 15% WBE participation requirement, while PEI designated ANS Refuse LLC to fulfill the entire goal. Only 25% of the contract goal can come from the non-manufacturing suppliers. Based on this cap, PEI falls far short of the requirement, dropping it from $138,836.25 to $34,709.06 in eligible participation. The substantial gap is not a minor oversight. It is a material deficiency that makes PEI's bid non-responsive under the IFB and Maryland law. PEI also made a mathematical error in its bid. For instance, item 602 totaling $678,600 was incorrectly calculated as $674,250, resulting in a $4,350 discrepancy. This error impacts the total contract value and directly contributes to PEI's failure to meet both the WBE and MBE goals. The shortfall in the WBE goal bleeds into the MBE requirement, further reducing their compliance. A simple review of the figures listed in the city's Board of Agenda document reveals that PEI fails to meet the goals in both categories. As a result, their entire MBE package is materially deficient, and it should be the responsibility of the Minority and Women Business Opportunity Office to reject their bid. As the next apparent lowest responsive and responsible bidder, JVCI deserves fair consideration. We submitted all required documentation properly and in good faith. Furthermore, the city issued JVCI a work capacity statement, which typically indicates intent to award the project to us as a responsive bidder. I would like to stress the significance of the work capacity statement issued to JVCI by the city. This document is not merely procedural, it is a clear acknowledgement of our capabilities to execute this project. The decision to pivot to another bidder despite their errors and non-compliance undermines the transparency and fairness of the procurement process. Today, I respectfully request the board reject PEI's bid as non-responsive, uphold the integrity of the process, and award contract TR 23004R to J Villa Construction, the truly qualified and compliant bidder. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'm available to answer any questions or provide additional clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Villa. Are there questions from the board? I see City Administrator Leach.
Yes, Mr. Villa, thank you so much for appearing before the board today. Can you answer a couple of specific questions for me? How much was your bid, the total bid package you submitted?
$950,000.
Got it. And what was the MWBE commitment outlined in your bid?
15%.
Got it. And what of that 15%, what percentage of that or what portion of that was for the non-manufacturer suppliers?
We stated under the correct statement in the contract, we wrote it in the correct placement. PEI is the one that they noted it as non-manufacturer suppliers.
Okay, so you did not submit any non-manufacturing suppliers as a part of your bid?
Right, where we put it, it was documented correctly. So it gets full value. So it's 100%. Where PEI's bid, they put it under non-manufacturer. So you're only capped at 25% of whatever you put. And that's where the error and deficiency comes.
Okay, so this is about your bid specifically. I just want to confirm, you did not provide for your MWBE requirement, none of what you submitted was for non-manufacturing suppliers, just to confirm.
Correct. Ours
Got
is community concrete.
Okay, thank you. And then last, on the work capacity statement, when did you receive that?
We received it July 15th. We turned it back in on July 16th in less than 24 hours.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Administrator. Any other questions? All right. I see our mayor is returning. Seeing no further questions, I entertain a motion to approve this award. Is there a motion?
So moved, yes, it is.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this item, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. This item is approved. The next item can be found on page 287 through 290, SB 2414945, Department of Public Works, proposed increase for Baltimore City water, sewer, and stormwater utility rates, fiscal year 2025 through fiscal year 2027. On behalf of DPW, we have Kenneth Williams, or Mr. Garbark.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, honorable members of the board. I'm Matt Garbark, the Interim Deputy Director for the Department of Public Works. Mr. Williams is going to be running the PowerPoint presentation that we have. In consultation with the Department of Finance, the Department of Public Works is proposing increases to water and sewer rates for the remainder of fiscal year 25, as well as increases to water, sewer, and stormwater rates for fiscal years 26 and 27. Next slide. For the remainder of fiscal year 25, we are proposing a 3% increase for water and a 15% increase for sewer. These rates will take effect February 1st, 2025. Taken together, these increases will result in an average 9.66% increase to a customer's bill. For fiscal years 26 and 27, we are proposing that water and sewer rate increases increase by 9% and that the stormwater rate increase by 3% each year. These increases would take effect July 1st of both 2025 and 2026, and the average increase on a customer's bill is going to be around 8.45%. In accordance with the city code, rates must be proposed at least 30 days prior to approval, and a public hearing must be held. As such, we are requesting that the board hold a public hearing on these increases during its regularly scheduled January 22nd meeting. Between now and then, the Department of Public Works will be holding 4 public meetings in different areas of the city to discuss the increases and to help answer any questions that the public may have. Next slide. I mentioned the proposed increases to the fiscal year 25 rates would be around 9.66% on average to a customer's bill. Looking at a household of around 4 to 5 individuals, which consumes generally 6 CCFs of water, this is a little over $12.50 a month. I should note that the rates are largely based on the amount of water that is consumed or utilized, so the less water that's used, obviously, the less the customer pays. Next slide. These increases are in line with other utilities around the region. I do want to note. The chart here shows how the rates of peer utilities have increased over the past 3 years, sometimes significantly, while our rates have remained the same. For example, for fiscal year 24, Pittsburgh increased its water and sewer rates by an average of over 14%, and Philadelphia increased their rates by over 12%. In comparison, we are proposing an average increase for fiscal year 25 of 9.66% and an average increase of 8.45% for fiscal years 25 and 26 and 27. Next slide. Please know that we did not arrive at these increases lightly. We focused on collecting outstanding debts as well as looking to contain our costs. Over the past year, the Department of Public Works has stood up an internal collections team which to date has collected over $50 million from unpaid bills. Additionally, this past September, we implemented a non-essential spending and hiring freeze to contain costs from the utility. Next slide. So what are the drivers of these increases? So the first is compliance. Our wastewater utility is under 2 federal consent decrees to eliminate sanitary sewer overflows as well as to make improvements to our wastewater treatment plants. These efforts, while necessary and essential, have been costly. The second is the growing number of critical projects needed to preserve and enhance our aging systems. Some of our mains and facilities are over a century old and need to be rehabilitated or completely reconstructed. Additionally, we have faced emergency scenarios where large, unforeseen projects must be tackled immediately. The final and most noticeable driver is inflation. Since 2021, the Consumer Price Index for urban consumers has increased 19.4%. Inflation has affected everything from the price of chemicals to construction materials to labor costs. I'll focus on each of these just in a bit more detail. Next slide. Because of the wastewater facilities consent decree, overall utility expenses have increased by nearly 38%. We've spent over $230 million in just 2 years on improvements to the Back River and Patapsco wastewater treatment plants. Additionally, we have increased our expenses for equipment, ongoing expenses for equipment at the plants by nearly 150%. And we have contracted with third parties for staff augmentation to provide additional support as necessary. Next slide. Because of these investments, both plants are functioning at peak efficiency and have been in full compliance with their permits since 2023. The $230 million worth of improvements to the plants include, among other things, the rehabilitation or refurbishment of 11 primary settling tanks, 4 centrifuges, and 8 fine screens. Our performance was recognized by the state for a $1.5 million grant. To date, we have accomplished 80% of the required consent decree items, which must be completed by December 2027. Next slide. As it relates to critical capital projects, we face 2 major issues: increasing bid prices and unforeseen emergencies. Over the past few years, we have seen an increasing number of bids exceed our engineering estimates. As an example, for the Back River Egg-Shaped Digester Rehabilitation Project, we estimated that cost at $78 million, but the lowest bid was 14% above that estimate at $89 million. We've also experienced emergencies that require significant and immediate expenditures. The sinkhole at Lake Montebello required an emergency rehabilitation of a 108-inch storm drain and is estimated to cost $30 million. To put that in perspective, the entire capital program for stormwater for fiscal '25 is $72 million. So this one project alone accounts for nearly 42% of the entire stormwater capital budget. Next slide. Finally, everyone has experienced the persistent and ongoing inflation that has driven up costs for nearly everything that we have. Next slide. Between fiscal years 2022 and 2024, we have seen our chemical expenses increase nearly 230%, from $17 million to $56 million. I should note that this is not driven by increased treatment or increased volume. We are treating the same volume. These are just the cost increases that have increased because of that. Additionally, many of our suppliers have requested increases in the cost to manufacture and deliver specialized equipment, which we use and must use at these plants, have steadily increased as well. Next slide. There are other external factors driving these increases beyond what I've just mentioned. Just to name a few of them, there's ongoing supply chain disruption concerns due to international conflict. There are the potential for tariffs that may or may not be imposed that could impact trade, as well as ongoing national labor disputes such as those within the maritime and freight rail industries. Next slide. So to summarize, we are looking to increase water and sewer rates by 3% and 15% respectively for fiscal year 2025, and are proposing increasing water and sewer rates by 9% and stormwater rates by 3% in fiscal years 26 and 27. We are requesting the board hold a public hearing on these proposed increases during its January 22nd regularly scheduled meeting. Between now and then, the Department of Public Works will hold 4 public meetings in different areas of the city to present these rates and to answer questions the public may have. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Garbark. Obviously, this is concerning for the residents of Baltimore, and I want to begin by asking, clearly you can't control inflation and you can't control events in other countries and the impact that it's going to have, but as we look at a pretty rapid increase in rates, where was there an opportunity in past years when we really modestly increased rates to have gone slightly higher in the out years instead of what we are now seeing, which I think could hit Baltimoreans hard in their pocket?
So thank you for that question, and I certainly appreciate that. And we did have 3 years of modest increases. What we are seeing now are the costs that were incurred during that period of time. So we did not really foresee what the steep increases would be, as well as the immediate expenses that needed to happen at the plants. So once those have been recognized, last year, for instance, we had to dip into our reserves for our rate stabilization fund to help fund the wastewater operation. So we really haven't been able to foresee all of these until now. We have been able to function and to preserve and meet all of those needs as the utility, but right now is when we've really come up with all of this information, and it's really been what's driving that at this point.
So in previous years, low rates of billing and under collection has been a factor. How does any of that factor into today's decision?
I'd say that again?
Low rates of billing and under collection?
Yeah. So that is a factor. We stood up a collections unit. We've had $50 million that have we've been able to collect. But when we're looking at the operations, we look at the actual cost of producing the water and the capital projects based on the users and based on how much demand there is. So when we're looking at it, we're looking at the cost drivers as well as what that projection is going to be for our debt, for our interest rates, all of that. It's really not driven by collections. It's driven more by the production costs and the capital costs and the amount of demand on the city. Every dollar that we bill is legally collectible. We can and do go after it. So that is considered revenue owed to the city. So when we look at our rates, we look at actual operating costs and the capital costs versus and how that impacts and how that is affected by the users and the number of users on the system.
The memo notes that an additional $48 million has been collected from commercial, multifamily, and governmental accounts as of November 2024. How much more remains outstanding that can be collected with additional focus and effort by
Certainly.
management?
So we focused first and foremost on commercial accounts, especially those that are some of our largest accounts. What we have right now is that has ticked up a little bit to $50 million. We still have, that's approximately about 50% of what we believe we can collect. We are sending more letters out this week and into early and mid-January and are actually ramping those efforts up. We have been able to satisfy 46 large accounts. So the large majority of that 50 million is just 46 accounts. So we're focusing on the largest low-hanging fruit that there is right now. And we are having more accounts that come into that, and we believe that we can get that additional 50% in the coming months as we go after that.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that we are aggressively going after our collections.
Yes, sir.
I want to recognize Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Deputy Director, I think it'd be prudent for you to talk about that unit in particular and the focus that we have had, because especially for the council president, because we know that some of these accounts and these large accounts we had never ever in their existence collected money for them. And we directed you all to make sure that we were starting to do that and talk about what work is going into that in the unit and how they go about making those collections.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that. It's been something that we've been particularly proud of this past year. There are, as the mayor mentioned, a lot of accounts that have not paid anything, that are active, that people are using the water, and it's not, there's just been no communication. We've attempted to call, we continue to send bills and nothing. What we've done is we actually hired staff, dedicated staff, where we do intensive outreach. We send letters, we contact them. We do as much as we can in terms of physical contact, in terms of engaging with them, in terms of engaging with their companies, with their businesses, as much as we can, and get them into payment plans and get them into repayment of that outstanding debt. So this has been a singular focus. In the past, it has been sort of an additional duty as, required by the staff. We have dedicated staff who this is all that they do, is try to collect that.
And I think the other thing I just want to highlight, and a question for the director too, Mr. President, because I asked the very same question to DPW that you asked when they briefed me about needing to have the rate increase. I'm like, well, could we have made smaller increases over the past few years? Obviously, as we all know, none of us could expect it or foreseen that inflation and the chemical costs could arise and all the other things that happen. But I think what the deputy director and the director raised for me that reminded me is that also when you look back, and I don't want to play Wednesday morning quarterback on this, we also have to be reminded that those modest increases, one of the driving factors for us to try to keep them modest is that, and we were still in the pandemic and coming out of it, and wanted to make sure that we were not overstressing our residents, many who jobs were gone and they didn't know how they were going to come back. But I wanted to make sure that we put that point back to the top. But my question for you, Mr. Director, when you look at our brother and sister cities and their cost increase, my guess is that they're increasing for the same exact reason. And I know you guys have communicated with them. I just want to see if that's true.
Yes, sir. It is mostly driven, obviously, inflation overall, but construction materials and commodities, in particular chemicals. I can't stress that enough. The chemical spikes that we've been seeing have been extraordinarily high. That is across the entire industry. These are very unique, sometimes caustic, dangerous chemicals. There's only 1, 2, maybe 3 producers of these in the entire country. They are transported usually by train, so any disruption to that adds additional costs, and then any other issues that may go into manufacturing those materials go into that as well. So we are seeing that across the entire industry, and it's mostly those construction material cost escalations and then the commodities.
And then the last thing I'll just mention is that because water billing is such a focus for us, Mr. President, Mr. Comptroller, OPI and DPW are going to have a team that's going to be focusing directly on that. I don't know, Mr. Director, if the President acknowledges, you can mention that even in deeper detail.
Yeah. One thing.
Mr. Zaid?
Yes, sir. One thing I want to mention before getting into that is yesterday we had a conversation or a discussion with Baltimore County, in which Baltimore County told us yesterday that their increase in project cost is roughly 40% in the capital project. So when you're looking at a capital project as large or a capital program as large as ours, and you're talking about a 40% increase of that, so that'll have a tremendous amount of increase to it. To add to the mayor's point at this case, we're going to be tracking every aspect of the way we do business with the OPI. And we're having someone on board right now that done it before is Steve Sharkey as the acting bureau head right now, who done it for CityStat. That thing will be extremely implied about every aspect of the way we do that with every project that we do, with every service that we perform. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Mr. Director, and I'm grateful to you and the mayor, especially for that directive around the collections and enforcement. We know that that has been a challenge for our city in the past, and when we have high-profile cases of large companies not paying their bills, that not only is embarrassing, but it also literally robs from the residents and everyone else, because we then have to raise the rate. So appreciate that focus in particular, knowing that we can control the things that we can control. We can't control inflation. We can't control what happens across the globe or whether President Trump imposes tariffs. But where it is within our locus of control, I think it's extremely important that we are aggressively going after folks who would seek to cheat our system. I saw the comptroller's hand up.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I go directly to the questions I have for DPW, I did want to make a clarification for folks at home and in this room that the item on the board before us right now is technically not the raising of the water rates as much as this is DPW's notice that they would like to have a hearing in no less than 30 days, which I believe is scheduled for January 22nd.
Correct. Yes, sir.
At the January 22nd meeting of the Board of Estimates. And so we're asking questions right now to try to draw out additional information for everybody in Baltimore to be aware of, so you can think about whether you want to weigh in on this in January. But we are not taking testimony today on this, although I did promise Ms. Trueheart that she could have extra time in January to make up for the fact that she came down here today and is just listening, which is not her favorite pose, but she's being willing to accept it. But the question, I do have a couple questions, some of which, the answers which may be helpful for people as they consider this over the course of the next month. One of which is how much historical data does DPW have access to in terms of past water rates and past raises? Because we sometimes see charts for like 5 years at a time or such, but I know I hear a lot of complaints from people who they have historical memories of how much in their minds water should cost based on what it used to. And I thought it might be helpful to have a more generational level set of data to work with. So if we could go back like 30 or 35 years into the 80s and 90s and show what water rates were, what increases happened when, and what average costs were, I have no doubt that people who remember paying significantly less paid significantly less. But I think if we're going to make the case, which I know I just finished year 17 as an elected official, and I have been out there at meetings on behalf of DPW making the case that we have a water and wastewater and now stormwater infrastructure that has literally decades of deferred maintenance. And I think it's important that we show people that what they think of as what water used to cost, they need to start thinking of as the days, instead of thinking of it as the good old days when water was cheap, they need to think of them as the bad old days where we weren't paying what we should have been so that we could keep up with proactive maintenance of our system. And I think we need to see that across a wider set of years to really get that message across. Yes, and if you want to like highlight the years in which we were in consent decrees with the federal
sir.
government, that would be, additional data is always good.
Absolutely. Yes, we have that. I can provide that.
There was another question. You talked a little bit about how the sudden emergencies can impact that annual budget. Can you talk a little bit about how that kind of sudden, unexpected impact on the budget can affect the bond rating for the system?
Certainly. So when we talk about the bond rating, that's really how we get graded when we go to the bond market, which then translates into the interest rates that we can get. When we have emergency work that has to happen immediately, there's a couple things. We really don't have the time to go out, do the deliberate due diligence of this is going to be a 2, 3-year, 4-year project. Let's put money aside. Let's put it all together so that we can get the best pricing, all of that. We got to go out now, and we got to buy everything and have it within a couple weeks, which we pay. There's a premium cost to that because it has to be delivered, has to be, there's markups to get it all there on time. That translates into additional spending. That translates then into not having as much on reserve, which means that our debt coverage ratio goes down. And when bond rating agencies generally look at utilities and other entities, they want to look at a larger debt coverage ratio. There is a balance there for that, but we have a legal reserve that we have to maintain to cover the bonds that we've issued, and then there's an additional reserve that we try to make and keep so that we can have unforeseen circumstances. That additional reserve, which usually translates into the number of days the utilities can operate without, if there was no billing or anything, the higher that ratio, generally the bond rating agencies view that more favorably, purely from a financial perspective, just looking at the ability to cover debt if there's an issue with that. So when we have these incidents where we have to dig into those reserves, that takes that reserve capacity away, which lowers that ratio, which then translates into concerns from bond rating agencies.
Okay. But that's the only question I have. That's the only question I have at this point. We had what I think of as a good first conversation about this when the department briefed me, and I look forward to continuing our conversation specifically on the ratio of how much money are we spending proactively and budgeting to spend on the huge amount of work that we need to do versus how much do we responsibly put in reserve to be prepared for the sudden emergencies when they occur.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thank you very much.
All right. Seeing no further questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the hearing.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. The next item. All those in favor of approving the motion for a hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. The motion for a hearing is approved. The next item can be found on pages 247, SB 2414795, Bureau of Procurement, on behalf of the Department of Transportation. This request is to approve an unauthorized procurement with Populous Technologies, Inc. On behalf of Procurement Development, we have Adam Mann.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr.
Morning.
Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, honorable board members. Adam Manny, your Chief Procurement Officer. First, I'd like to thank DGS for lowering the temperature in here in a tweed suit. I thought I was going to melt, so thank you very much.
It's expected somebody else's room is now hot.
Yes, okay.
We're coming before you as a request to pay an outstanding invoice for $21,000 to Populous Technologies. This was an unauthorized procurement. This is a web-based platform service that we had without a valid contract in place. DOT uses this to monitor compliance with its dockless vehicle program and its rules and regulations. This happened due to some administrative changes in DOT, and they did not submit a requisition in time to have these services brought forward. So we're requesting permission to pay the invoice.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the board? All right. Seeing no further questions, I would entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The item is approved. The next item can be found on page 248, SB 2413732, Bureau of Procurement on behalf of MR Office of Children and Family Success. This request is to approve an unauthorized procurement with Benevate Inc., DBA Neighborly Software. Once again, on behalf of procurement, we have
Adam Manning, your Chief Procurement Officer.
Mr. Manning.
Thank you. This is a request for an unauthorized procurement with Benevate Inc., DBA. They're doing business as Neighborly Software. This is an important piece of software that is used by the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Services. The purpose of this software is it's used for eviction prevention. This software use that we're asking happened between the expiration of one contract and the time we were able to come before this board for a new contract. This is covering that period that was in between where we didn't have the contracts formally in place, and we're requesting permission to make the payment of $285,600, which would cover the cost from, it was a year as we were going through, from April 7th of 23 through April 6th of 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. Questions from the board? Seeing no questions, I would entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving this item, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. The item is approved. Thank you. The next item can be found on page 244, SB 2414649, Bureau of Procurement on behalf of the State's Attorney. This request is to approve an unauthorized procurement for the installation of dual drop data. Once again, on behalf of procurement, we have Mr. Manning.
Thank you, sir. This is a request for an unauthorized procurement on behalf of the State's Attorney's Office for $5,685.84. The supplier was brought in to bring in data drops as they have increased the size of their staff and they needed more things and more workspace for productivity. Without the data drops, they would not be as productive as it was. We did have a conversation with them, informing them that we really do need to have the purchase order in place first prior to getting the work done, which caused the unauthorized, and we're requesting permission to pay the bill.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the board? I see Comptroller Henry.
So officially, the emergency nature of the request is a desire to be more efficient.
That is, well, the unauthorized was their desire to be more proficient.
Okay.
And we worked with them so that in the future we can get a multi-year contract in place, so when they have this and they're expanding staff, it'll be an easy purchase order to put through.
So they have that in place, they
Yes.
have the contract in place now?
Yes, if it is not in place, I know we're working on it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, I would entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this item, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. This item is approved. The next item can be found on page 245, SB 2414615, Bureau of Procurement on behalf of MR Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. This request is to approve an unauthorized procurement with the PEACE, PEACE team for services provided in connection with the Summer Youth Program. Once again, on behalf of procurement, we have Mr. Manning.
Thank you, sir. This is a request to pay $57,250 to the Peace Team. This is for a period from June 1st of '24 through September 1st of '24. The agency had been working with the supplier on a contract. It was not completed in time for the Mayor's Summer Youth Engagement Program. The services were rendered as we brought in. There's one other which falls under the same category. I've been working with the director and their team to make sure that we have contracts in place prior to next year's summer engagement program. So the one after that will probably be the last one as we continue, and we're requesting permission to pay this because we received goods and services prior to having a contract or a purchase order in place.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the board? Seeing and hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The item is approved. The next item can be found on page 243, SB 1448, Bureau of Procurement. On behalf of MR, Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, the request is to approve an unauthorized procurement with We Are Us Entity Engagement Men's Movement Incorporated for services provided in connection with the Summer Youth Program. On behalf of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, we have Ms. Mavronis, who I see is there, but also I believe we are going straight to Mr. Manny.
We'll come here. This is the same item as the one before, and one last item on it is we engage the services for the mayor's summer youth program. This was again through June 29 of 2024 through September 4th of 2024. We engaged their program to help us with the outreach and engagement and safety and services associated with the summer strategy. We did not have a contract in place or a purchase order in place prior to that, which then caused the unauthorized procurement. Again, I've been working with the director's office to ensure that for next year's summer youth engagement programs, we have all of our contracts in place early.
Understood. Mr. Comptroller?
I'm sorry, I probably should have asked this question for the Peace Team also, except I was assuming I knew the answer. But if you're saying this is the same, like, what exact services are they providing?
I see Director Mavronis. Recognize Director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, Stephanie Mavronis.
Thank you. So if you recall, between Memorial Day and Labor Day, we have had youth engagement teams. So both the Peace Team, We Our Us, and School Police, which you'll see an additional, this is the final one that you'll see from School Police as an unauthorized procurement. They all provided engagement services with you. So literally on the ground, reaching our young people, building relationships weekend after weekend on Friday, Saturday nights, and holiday Sundays.
Okay.
And so that's engagement they did in
So
partnership with
they
our
are
team.
all providing the same services?
Providing the same services. Some of them have different modalities.
Approaches,
But
okay.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Mavronis. Any other questions from the board? Seeing no further questions, I would entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this item, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Great. The next item can be found on page 246, SB 2414558, Bureau of Procurement. On behalf of MR, Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, this request is to approve an unauthorized procurement on behalf of Baltimore City Schools with BPD, who provided outreach and safety for the summer youth program. Once again, on behalf of the city, Mr. Manny.
Thank you, sir. This is a request to make an unauthorized procurement for the payment of $39,983.27. Baltimore City Public Schools for a period of May 1st of 2024 through August 31st of 2024, where they provided outreach and security engagements through the summer youth program for calendar year 24. And this should be the last one as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Manny. Questions? Seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this item, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. This item is approved. The next item can be found on page 237, SB 2414618, Parking Authority of Baltimore City. This request is to approve an emergency procurement for the Lexington Street garage elevator. Mr. Manny, you're back.
Yeah, I am. I think
Back
I'm
in
going to grab one
action.
of the chairs from the back. I'm up here. Thank you. This is to inform the board of an emergency procurement for the Lexington Street garage elevator repairs that we had to have done. One of the elevators had been down for a long period of time. We had brought in TK to look at it. The management company of the garage had done so. We had worked with them. It turned out that the main controller, not comptroller, but controller, was an outdated system and it needed to be upgraded. The one controller actually controls both elevators, so if you send one elevator to one floor, the other one doesn't try and run up to do it. And this was done under an emergency basis following our emergency procurement program where it went through, and this is to notify the board of that it happened. And the total value was $42,821.75.
Duly noted. Mr. Comptroller?
Why didn't they fix both elevators?
They were working on the one elevator, and it turned out that it is the central controller unit, which controls both elevators, that had to be replaced and done on the emergency. If it had failed, both elevators would have been down.
But this was already done, right? Because this is an emergency.
This is an
procurement.
emergency, yes.
Yeah, so this was already done. So why is one elevator still not working?
That I can't answer, sir. My understanding is that this fixed the problem for both, but if it's not working, I would have to refer back to the agency.
Parking authority.
The parking
If you could
authority.
send back to the parking authority, I'm going to say, what's the best expression to use for this? I have passionate inquiries as to why there is still not two regularly working elevators in the Lexington Street
I
garage.
will reach out directly to the director on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Mr. Mayor?
I think one reason I think the mayor may have a hold trying to increase the workforce is step intake, Mr. Comptroller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay.
Wait, if that's the case,
Mr.
that's the case, I will send,
Mr. Comptroller?
I will send future passionate inquiries directly to the mayor's office. Feel free to have them directed to the point person for, actually, fitness is in HR, right? Like that's health and wellness, right? Okay.
I am not getting in the middle of that. Thank you all. All right. Is there, seeing no further questions, is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Second.
It's an emergency procurement. We just.
Oh, it's an emergency, sorry.
Okay.
Disregard.
This item is noted. All right. Okay. The next item can be found on pages 6 through 7, SB 241484, supplemental appropriation to the FY 25 adopted budget. This request is to approve a supplemental to appropriate a portion of the funds received from litigation with pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors. The mayor's executive order establishing the opioid restitution fund is guiding the use of this funding. On behalf of BBMR, we have Director Laura Larson.
Good morning, Council President Cohen, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, members of the Honorable Board. Laura Larson, City Budget Director. So I am here this morning to present to you a supplemental to the fiscal 26 or the fiscal 25 budget to appropriate just over $14 million for a variety of programs that will be supported through funds that we have received through litigation efforts regarding the opioid industry. So just a couple of points about these funds and a little bit of background regarding the source. So to date, the city has received funds, $668.5 million from 8 different firms as part of our opioid litigation efforts. The award amounts from McKesson and AmerisourceBergen reflect the results of the jury trial that was completed earlier this fall, with final damages still being determined through the abatement process in court. The other thing to note is that there is one pending amount with one of the firms that also will be announced at a later date. As part of the settlements with these firms, there were a number of allocations to local community-based organizations who would receive direct grants through the funds. Again, the grants and these organizations and the amounts are all spelled out in settlement documents with the individual firms. In total, these organizations will receive $87 million of that total of the funds that the city has received. Awarding these funds will be subject to additional approvals by this board by way of grant agreements. And the way that this is envisioned to work is that these grantees will receive an upfront payment to stand up their programs, and then subsequent payments will be allocated to the organizations on a reimbursable basis. The Mayor's Office of Recovery Programming is going to build upon the framework that they have established for administering ARPA funds to be responsible for the grant oversight of all of these agreements. Back in August, the mayor released an executive order that outlined the playbook for how these funds would be reinvested back into our community. The executive order had 5 key provisions. It says that we are going to establish a separate opioid restitution fund to manage these funds, that we're going to structure that fund like a trust so that we can expand the duration and the impact of the dollars on our community. That we're going to create a couple of positions within the mayor's office to help oversee these funds, including the executive director of overdose response and an opioid restitution program manager. The executive order also announced the creation of the Restitution Advisory Board that will be made up of individuals from the community to help guide how these funds are administered, and the recruitment for that board is underway right now. And then outlined key documents and the framework for how we'll approach the accountability and the transparency around these dollars. So one of the first things that we are doing coming out of the executive order is establishing a trust fund. And as I mentioned, our goal here is to expand the duration and the impact of the dollars. This is a life-changing amount of money to be able to invest back into these programs. And so our goal here is to be able to leverage returns from the funds that we are receiving in order to expand the duration of the dollars for no less than 15 years. We're borrowing from the structure of our pension funds, so the goal here is that this trust will live within the city's funds, but will be sort of managed separately from our broader treasury. And again, the goal here is to maximize any sort of returns so that we can invest those dollars back into programs or capital projects needed in order to combat the impacts of the opioid epidemic in our community. The proceeds of this board would be invested under the guidance of a financial advisor, but we will retain decision-making as a city, and we will retain the decision-making authority of ultimately how those funds are invested. Your agenda today also included a separate contract with Public Financial Management, or PFM, where we have requested to bring them on board to help us work through the process of selecting that firm who will support this work. So back to the supplemental. So in total, we're requesting just over $14.6 million. This is what we anticipate needing to continue standing up these funds and the infrastructure to begin administering them for the second half of fiscal 25. So the specific items within the supplemental are $10.27 million for the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. So that's 2 different components, $270,000 for additional positions and contractual support to stand up the process to administer the grants to community-based organizations. And then $10 million for grants to those named organizations that I shared with you a couple minutes ago. The $10 million here reflects what we believe will get allocated in fiscal 25 as part of those upfront payments to organizations as they're standing up their programs. Within the mayoralty budget, we're recommending $1.7 million. $1.6 million of that will go to administration and community engagement associated with these funds. So a portion of that are those 2 key positions that are mentioned in the executive order. But as part of that, there's also funds to support our community engagement efforts, where the community is providing insight and feedback for how these dollars should be reinvested, as well as some additional costs associated with getting the fund up and running. There's also $143,000 for the initial costs that are anticipated for the Restitution Advisory Board, and so that would include the stipends for the board members that will be joining the board, as well as the support costs anticipated for that entity. Next up, in the Health Department, we're recommending $2.5 million. $2 million of that will be going directly into an opioid response service, and this is part of a multi-year $20 million commitment that was also announced as part of the release of the executive order. This initial $2 million will be largely used for the Health Department to create a number of specific positions within their team, and then the program costs to support those positions. There's also $500,000 for planning and design for a new facility to replace the Druid Hill Health Clinic. And then finally, there's $100,000 recommended for the law department to create 2 additional assistant solicitor positions who will support the grant oversight and contracting process for these agreements. And again, all of these amounts recommend a partial year of funding, so anywhere that these dollars are going towards personnel costs, we'll see those annualized when we bring back the fiscal 26 budget. Before we wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit about how future appropriations will be handled from this fund. And in short, those dollars will be allocated as part of the annual budget process. So you'll see them when you see the ordinance of estimates work its way both through this body and through the City Council. You'll see those funds invested for various grants for community organizations, investments in particular city services, or potentially investments in capital projects and infrastructure, again, for those specific areas that were greatly impacted by the epidemic. Just noting that subject to the board approval of this item, it will go to the City Council for introduction and consideration before that body, before this supplemental would be approved. And I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Larson. I will take a brief moment of personal privilege to just thank Mayor Scott for refusing to accept the universal settlement, and thank Solicitor Thompson for her exceptional lawyering. We are in a moment where faith in government is low, but when folks see us fighting on their behalf, on behalf of the thousands of residents that we have lost to this illness, and fighting for justice, I think it renews people's sense that we got their back and that we are here to do the right thing. And we talk a lot about accountability for individuals, as we should. But I think it's also important that there be accountability when large pharmaceutical corporations contribute to suffering in our communities. And so, again, I just want to sincerely thank you for really what is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to heal and to rebuild what has been, for a very long time, broken within our communities. I will again note that I am going to abstain from this item, as this will be before the City Council. It is my full expectation that the Council will be a partner in these ongoing conversations. But again, I just want to sort of recognize the import of this moment and thank those that helped to make it happen. With that, I'll entertain any questions from the board. Seeing no questions, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
This motion has been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay.
Abstain.
Abstain. I will note 2 abstentions, Comptroller Henry and myself, Council President Cohen. This motion is approved. The next item is a walk-on request for SB 2414843 from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, requesting approval of a memorandum of understanding, First Amendment for DPSCS, MONSE, BCRP, MOED, and DPW. On behalf of the administration, we have Director Mavronis.
Thank you, Honorable Board. As you mentioned, this is an amendment to the agreement for our Returning Citizens Behind the Wall initiative. So this is an initiative that is funded by American Rescue Plan Act funds. We work with individuals who are preparing to return home to Baltimore City to connect them with $15 an hour employment. That work started with the Baltimore City Recreation and Parks Department. Through this amendment, we're adding DPW as an official partner to expand the opportunities for work sites with this initiative. Additionally, this amendment does three other important things. One is that it extends the contract term through the end of 2025 to make sure we can continue this initiative and utilize fully the ARPA funds invested. It also expands the scope not only to add DPW as a partner, but also to include MCIW, the Women's Institution. So we've already begun doing behind-the-wall work with incarcerated women and are also already beginning to bring them into the work with this initiative. Importantly, from an ARPA perspective, and why this was walked on today, this right-sizes the ARPA obligation. The original ARPA obligation here was $5,486,400. As we've gotten into the work and had an opportunity to review the actual data, so our number of participants, what the spend looks like from the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services at the state, we're right-sizing this contract to a total of $986,400. We work in this program with any individual who is eligible for pre-release work release, but also who is returning home to Baltimore City. And so that shrinks the pie in terms of who is available to do this program at any point in time. I did want to mention that since we soft launched this program back in spring 2023, 165 participants, both men and women, have benefited from this initiative. And so it's meant that as people are released and returning home, they get that they get $15 an hour wages rather than what they're getting as a basic while they're incarcerated. This is also an initiative through which we've been able to connect people with safe return planning. So really doing what the mayor tasked our agency with doing, starting reentry planning well before someone returns home. So making sure everything from mental health services, housing, and other key matters are identified, addressed, and documented with the support of my team prior to release, and then continuing that relationship post-release. Happy to answer any questions about this.
Thank you, Director Mavronis. Thank you for this work. I also want to thank my colleague, Councilman James Torrance, for his leadership in passing and creating the Office of Returning Citizens and his partnership with MONSE as well. Are there any questions from the board? I see Comptroller Henry.
Less a question and more of just a clarification that I am personally supportive of this effort. I agree that the work is important. Normally, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it. Normally, the speed with which this was done, I would have asked to defer this item till the next meeting because the pre-audits did not get a chance to review this item. But I recognize the fact that we have to get this done before the 31st, and so there is not time to do that. So I'm going to be abstaining just because pre-audits didn't have a chance to review it, but I thank you for doing this work. Yeah.
Other questions from the board? Seeing and hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
It being moved and properly seconded, I will entertain a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay.
Abstain.
I will note one abstention, Comptroller Henry. Thank you. This motion is approved. As there is no more business before the board, we will adjourn. The next regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimates will occur on Wednesday, January 8th, 2025 at 9 a.m. I thank everyone for participating and tuning in. Thank you.
Good afternoon, TV 25. Thank you, and thanks to folks who are tuning in and to our live studio audience today. Hello, everyone. We are getting started just a few minutes late because our board meeting this morning ran right up and into this one. So bear with us. We're going to move through these a little more slowly than usual to make sure we get names and everything recorded properly into the tabulation tables. So we have 2 addenda to note for folks in the bidding world today. One is from the Bureau of Procurement. This is RFQ 642. Again, that was RFQ 642, Hazard Reduction Relocation Services. This is not only changing its opening date, but there's a bigger story. The new opening date is January 8th, 2025, and solicitation RFQ 642 has been replaced with RFQ 672. Again, that's RFQ 000642 has been replaced with RFQ 000672. Only the RFQ number and bid opening date have changed. Everything else stays the same. The new bid due opening date for the solicitation is now January 8th, 2025 at 11 a.m. local time, as usual. And if you have completed your bid documents using the reference RFQ 642, that bid will still be accepted. Just know that when you hear us read these out, in the new year, we will be referencing RFQ 672. And if that confused anyone, please call our offices, the Comptroller's office, so we'll be happy to walk through that to make sure you are comfortable with that change and know what's going on. The other addenda for today is also for procurement, RFQ 658 for historic preservation building maintenance. The bid opening date was today, but it has now been rescheduled to January 22nd, 2025. Again, that was RFQ 658 for historic preservation building maintenance, and the new opening date is January 22nd, 2025. And now, for the business at hand. Up first, we have procurement RFQ 346. This is for fire hydrants and replacement parts. And Abby and I are going to do our usual reading the numbers back and forth to make sure we have them right. And everything we're opening right now should be for 346, RFQ 346.
Up first, we have L/B Water Service Inc. I believe this one is itemized and does not have a total.
Okay. Do we have copies?
Yeah, no copy.
So we have one original, of course. Okay. And that bid is, I guess these are probably going to be itemized. Everybody will be itemized, and we will not be reading totals.
We have a copy.
We have,
Yeah, it's the same one.
yeah, 1, 2 copies.
Yeah.
That's it. Must have, sorry if they came in.
I'm sorry, you said we have 2 dupes?
2 dupes.
Thank you.
So it's, okay, so it's these. Okay. Great. Great.
You want me to take this? And still itemized, there's no totals in these. Okay. So that bidder was LB Water Service, Inc. Again, these are itemized bids, which means we refer them to the agency to review the details. Okay. Up next.
Up next, we have Ferguson Enterprise LLC. This is also itemized and does not have a total. Two copies. Okay, let's do this.
Thank you. That's a flash drive, 2 duplicates, and the original. And that was for Ferguson LLC. Again, itemized, so we will not be sharing a total.
Our final bidder is Core and Main LP.
Core, C-O-R-E?
Yes. This is itemized and does not have a total.
And how many copies and all that?
2 copies.
And a flash drive?
Yes.
Great. And was that our final? Yes. Okay. That was our final of 3 bidders, and I'm going to run through those names again for those who are keeping track. This was RFQ 346, fire hydrants and replacement parts, and we have 3 itemized bids, one from LB Water Service, Inc., Ferguson LLC, and Core and Main LLC. Up next, we have RFQ 661, City Building LED Lighting Installation for Small Sites.
Up first, we have CS Koida LLC.
Can you spell that for me?
Koida.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing the total. I'm not, I don't believe there's a total listed here. Yeah. No.
Casey, could you double check too?
Yeah, no total.
One of the copies to see if you see totals or if this is going to be itemized. We didn't get that instruction. It says this is an IFB. Itemized? Okay. So we have an original, any flash drives? Duplicates?
Up next, we have Synergetics.
Abby, do we have any duplicates for that one?
No, no duplicates.
No dupes.
No
Okay.
dupes. No.
Sorry, that was CS Koida LLC. And up next?
Up next, we have Synergetics.
Can you spell that one for me?
CENERGETIX.
Oh, okay. Okay.
This is also itemized.
Flash drive?
Yes.
Copies?
Yep. 2.
Thank you. And do we have more for this
That was
bid?
the last one.
Oh, okay. So that was the final of 2 itemized bids for RFQ 661, City Building LED Lighting Installation for Small Sites. Those bidders were CS Koida LLC and Synergetics. Synergetics. So those were the 2 bidders for RFQ 661. Up next, we have also for the Bureau of Procurement RFQ 663, Waterworks Repair Parts.
We have 1 bidder, LB Water Service, Inc.
LB Water Service, Inc.
And
And is this also itemized since it's
this
parts?
is, yep, this is
Yep.
itemized.
Okay, so we have an original,
We have
a
an
flash
original.
drive. Sometimes they hide.
Yeah, oh, yep, we have a flash drive.
Okay.
Yep.
Any duplicates?
I'm not seeing any duplicates. No.
We do.
Oh, yes, we
sorry,
do.
We do have duplicates, they're just.
Oh, they might have separately
they're
boxed them.
gigantic, so that's 3 duplicates.
3 dupes?
They're
Okay.
not-
Okay. So that was LB Water Service, Inc., and that was our only bidder.
Correct.
LB Water Service, Inc., our only bidder. This was an itemized bid. Again, will be referred to the agency for review, and this was for RFQ 663 Waterworks Repair Parts. Up next, for Department of Public Works, we have WC 1349R, Madison Street area, 30-inch water.
We're sorry, we're still
Whoops.
working these.
Oh, I
Sorry,
thought,
we're
I was
still
told that was
on
the,
663.
oh, I thought that was the only one. I'm so
No,
sorry.
there's just, it's just heavy.
Rewind that, please. I apologize. That we're still on RFQ 663, Waterworks Repair Parts. My hearing is failing.
Is this the second one? There's one more. There's one flash.
Okay. Okay. Great. We have Core and Main, LP. This is also itemized and does not have a total.
Okay. And copies?
Yep, 2 copies.
2. And?
All right. Up next, we have Ferguson Enterprise. This is also itemized.
Is that Ferguson Enterprise LLC?
Just Ferguson Enterprise.
Itemized. And number of duplicates?
3.
Thank you.
And that was our final.
Okay. So we have 3 responders for RFQ 663 Waterworks Repair Parts. Those bidders, those itemized bidders were LB Water Service, Inc., Core and Main LP, and Ferguson Enterprise. Now, moving on to Department of Public Works, WC 1349R, Madison Street area 30-inch water main rehabilitation. How many do we have? Can we tell?
We have 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because of the lovely envelopes they come in.
Oh, we do appreciate capital bid envelopes.
All right, up first, we have, I want to say Uleman Chute Construction, LLC. Oh.
Yep, it's Ullaman Shooty.
Ullaman Shooty,
I think.
okay. There you
Is it
go.
2 L's? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
I misspelled it when I did it the other way for some reason. Okay. Ullaman Shooty, LLC.
Yep. And that total is 79,900,000.00.
There's no column for bond, but I'm assuming with a number like that, we are talking about a bond.
There's a bond, yep.
So, Casey, this doesn't let me insert
I can do it.
a column. Are you able to do it? Okay, thank you. And then I'm assuming we have some duplicates.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we have 2, I believe, or just 1?
Is this one duplicate?
Just the 1.
1?
Yeah.
And an original and flash drive. And we're looking for the bond, yeah?
Bond's in there.
Which sometimes takes us a minute to find. Well, I'm just letting everyone know what's going on when they're watching us look at each other.
Because of the height issue.
You don't see it either, Abby?
This is a different one.
The bond for Ullaman Shooty? There's got to be a bond for this gigantic number. It's hard to imagine. Bear with us, folks. We are searching for the ever elusive bond document. Can you look at one of the copies to see if it's more obvious? Oh, this is the copy?
The duplicate is underneath.
This is the original? Okay, that's what I was trying to figure Oh, because they copy everything on Earth into the original, okay. I hate to tell everyone, but last time I did this, I had to look at every single page until I found it. Here it is. I have it on page 29. It is complete and it's attested.
Okay, good. Oh, found a copy.
It's facing the back of, like, you won't see it because it's facing the back of a page. Like, it's easy to overlook. So I'm going to repeat that number back to you, Abby, to make sure I got it right in our bond search distraction. That was Ullaman Shooty LLC, and the number was 79,900,000.00.
Yeah, that's correct.
And yes, they have a bond. And so that bidder was $79,900,000 and 0 cents. Okay. And up next.
Our second and final bidder is WM Schlosser Company, Inc.
Sometimes it's just not easy after you've been talking all morning.
You know what I mean? Yeah. That's
It
where
was
to draw the
WM
line.
Schlosser Inc.?
Inc.,
Is that
yes,
just-
that's correct.
Thank you.
And that total is 104, comma 722, comma 000.00.
Okay. And we have an original and a flash drive, probably.
And we have a bid bond.
Oh, they don't do flash drives?
Just
Sometimes I see them.
They have 2 originals and 1 copy.
There was one in Ullaman, wasn't there? Oh, all right.
There are 2 originals.
Yeah.
Okay.
1 copy.
I'm changing that.
I mean, 2 duplicates.
There are 2,
They have this
there's
listed.
an original and 2 dupes for this one? For WM Schlosser. Okay, and you see the bond?
Yes.
Executed. Okay, that bidder was WM Schlosser Inc. The number was 104, comma 722, comma 000.00.
That is correct.
Also known as $104,722,000 and 0 cents for WM Schlosser Inc. Do we have another bidder? That was our final of 2 bidders for WC 1349R, Madison Street area 30-inch water main rehabilitation. And our last opening for today is also for public, right? Okay. Is also for Public Works. I didn't want to get everyone excited. Is also for Public Works, SC 994. This is for clarifiers and gravity sludge thickeners. Rehabilitation. There's like not a connection between those words there, but that is what it says. SC 994.
Up first, we have Northeast Remsco Construction, Inc.
You said Remsco?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Remsco Construction?
Yep, Construction,
Sorry,
Inc.
I'm
No, you're fine. Totally fine.
Inc.
Right.
And
The total is 12, comma 153, comma 195.00.
that number was 12, comma 153, comma 195.00.
That is correct.
And we have an original and how many copies?
We have 1 copy.
And no flash drives,
No flash drives.
because we are tracking those little things now. Okay. So that was Northeast Remsco Construction, Inc. for $12,153,195 and 0 cents.
Yep.
And do we have another?
Yes, we have 1 more. All right. All right. Our final bidder is Spinello Companies. And that total is 13, comma 923, comma 300.00.
Okay, that number was 13,923,300.00.
That is correct.
And we have one original and how many dupes?
One copy.
Thank you. That bidder was Spinello Companies for $13,923,300.00, and that was our final bidder for SC 994 clarifiers and gravity sludge thickeners rehabilitation. And that was our final bid opening for today. Our next bid opening is in the new year, January 8th at 12 noon. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we appreciate it. Thanks. Thanks, TV25.